Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey across the dark waters of the River Thames, stepping into a world that exists only in the glow of 15,000 lamps. Imagine paying half your weekly wages just to walk through a gate. Imagine a place where a prince whispers secrets to his mistress, while pickpockets work the crowd 3 feet away. Where the food costs more than your rent, but comes in portions so small you can see through them. This is Vauxhall Gardens in 1750, London's most magical, most scandalous and most expensive escape from reality. And tonight, you are going to experience one complete evening there, from the moment you step into a stranger's boat until the lamps go dark and you stumble back into the London night. Possibly a little drunk, definitely a lot poorer, and absolutely changed forever. This is the story of pleasure gardens, the original theme parks, the first nightclubs, the birthplace of eating out in public, and it all starts with a very dark river and a very long boat ride. So before we cross that river together, I need to ask you something. If you are finding this story intriguing, if you are already imagining those glowing lamps reflected on dark water, would you take just a moment to subscribe to this channel? Hit that like button if you're settling in for the night, and maybe drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, what time it is there right now. Are you in bed, on a night shift, driving through darkness? I genuinely love knowing who is on this journey with me. And hey, adjust your pillows, dim those lights, maybe let a fan hum softly in the background. Get comfortable. We have got a long, strange night ahead of us. Now, let us step into that boat. It is late May in 1750. The sun has just set over London, and you are standing on the north bank of the Thames near Westminster. The city behind you is starting to settle into its nightly rhythm, that peculiar mix of danger and possibility that comes with 18th century darkness. No streetlights yet, just the occasional lanterns swinging outside a tavern and the distant glow of candles through dirty windows. And you are about to do something that by your standards is absolutely insane. You're about to spend 1 shilling to cross this river and walk through a garden for a few hours. Let me put that in perspective for you. 1 shilling. If you're a housemaid, and statistically there is a decent chance you are, you earn about 2 shillings per week. 2 shillings for 6 days of scrubbing floors, hauling water, emptying chamber pots, serving meals, and taking orders from people who barely see you as human. So tonight, right now, you are about to spend half of your weekly income on entertainment, half your wages for 1 evening. That is like someone today dropping $300 or $400 just to get through the door of a park. Why would you do this? Well, because you have been saving for 6 months. Because your friend Sarah went last summer and would not shut up about it. Because you heard the Prince of Wales himself goes there. Because you want, just once, to feel like you belong to that glittering world you see from the outside every single day. But first, you need to get across this river, and that means finding a waterman. The Thames in 1750 is not the picturesque river you might imagine. It is London's highway, its sewer, and its workplace all at once. The water is dark, and not the clean, mysterious dark of an ocean. This is the murky, questionable dark of a river that has accepted every type of waste a city of 700,000 people can produce. You do not want to think too hard about what is floating past your feet right now, but you also do not have much choice. There are only 2 bridges across the Thames at this point. London Bridge, which is way east and covered with houses and shops like some medieval relic, and Westminster Bridge, which just opened a few years ago and is closer but still not quite where you need to be. The fastest, cheapest way to Vauxhall is by water, so you need a waterman, and they are everywhere. The riverbank is crowded with them, men in rough clothes calling out their prices, gesturing toward their boats. These are the wherries, small wooden boats that can hold 6 to 8 passengers, rowed by 1 or 2 watermen with arms like iron and lungs to match. On a busy night, and tonight is going to be busy because the weather is perfect, there might be 400 wherries working this route. 400 boats back and forth, carrying the curious and the wealthy and the hopeful across the dark water to the gardens on the south bank. You haggle a bit with the grizzled waterman named Tom, who has kind eyes and teeth that have seen better days. He wants 6pence for the crossing. You offer 3, you settle on 4. You're already spending more than you planned, and you've not even arrived yet. You step into the wherry, and it rocks under your feet in a way that makes your stomach flip. The wooden seat is damp. There are 5 other passengers already waiting. A well-dressed couple who smell of expensive cologne, 2 young men who are already half drunk and laughing too loud, and a woman in a fine silk dress who might be respectable or might be something else entirely. In the darkness and the press of bodies, it is hard to tell, and that you will learn is part of the point. Tom pushes off from the bank, and suddenly you are gliding across the Thames. The oars creak in their locks with a rhythm that is probably older than language. Splash, pull, creak, splash, pull, creak. The river smells like wet wood and worse things, but the air is cooler out here, away from the packed streets. Above you, the sky is deepening from grey to purple to black, and the first stars are appearing. Someone in the boat starts humming a tune. One of the drunk young men joins in, and then you realise it's a bawdy song about Vauxhall itself, something about pretty girls and dark walks and kisses that cost more than money. The respectable couple pretends not to hear. The woman in silk smiles to herself. The crossing takes about 20 minutes, and with every stroke of the oars, London is falling away behind you. The noise is fading. The smell is changing from coal smoke and waste to something greener, earthier. You are heading toward Lambeth, toward the rural edges of the city where there are still fields and trees and space to breathe. Vauxhall Gardens sits on 12 acres of what used to be farmland and orchards. In daylight, it probably looks like just another rich person's estate. But at night it becomes something else entirely. As you get closer to the south bank, you start to see other boats. Lots of other boats. The river is getting crowded with wherries all heading in the same direction, all carrying people dressed in their finest clothes, all buzzing with that particular energy that comes before an event. A party, an experience, a chance to be someone different for a few hours. Tom steers his boat toward a small dock where lanterns are already burning, and several other watermen are helping passengers disembark. You stand carefully, trying not to rock the boat, and step onto the wooden planking that feels wonderfully solid under your feet. The well-dressed couple sweeps past without a word. The drunk young men nearly fall into the water and think it is hilarious. The woman in silk gives Tom an extra penny and a smile that makes him blush. And you stand there for a moment, smoothing down your dress, checking that the ribbon in your hair has not come loose, taking a deep breath. You can hear music already, faint, distant, but definitely music, and laughter, and the murmur of many voices. You've made it across the river. You've spent 4pence you could not really afford, and now, ahead of you, there is a narrow street leading away from the water toward a building that looks entirely ordinary in the darkness. No grand entrance, no golden gates, just a regular townhouse that could belong to anyone. But there is a line of people waiting to get in, and that line includes women in dresses that cost more than you will earn in a year, men in embroidered waistcoats and powdered wigs, servants who saved up just like you did, apprentices out for a wild night, and, if the rumours are true, the occasional minor royal travelling incognito. Everyone is heading toward the same small door. Everyone is reaching into their pockets for that same 1 shilling. You join the queue. The people in front of you are discussing whether the rotunda at Ranelagh is really more impressive than Vauxhall. Someone behind you is explaining loudly that they heard Wolfgang Mozart performed at Ranelagh when he was just a child. Can you imagine? A child prodigy from Austria. The world is full of wonders. The line moves forward. You can see the entrance now. There is a man taking money, checking tickets, nodding people through. His face is bored but efficient. He has done this 1,000 times. He will do it 1,000 more before the night is over. You reach the front. You pull out your carefully saved shilling, a small silver coin that feels heavier than it should in your palm. The man takes it without looking at your face. He has already forgotten you. You are just another shilling in an endless stream of shillings that will keep Jonathan Tyers, the owner of this establishment, very comfortable indeed. And then you step through the door into his house. Yes, his actual house. The entrance to Vauxhall Gardens is through the proprietor's residence. You walk into a narrow, dark hallway, after the open air by the river. This feels claustrophobic, almost oppressive. The passage is long and gloomy, the walls close on either side. You can smell coal fires and old wood, and the faint scent of the pomade that rich men wear in their wigs. The music is louder now, but still muffled, still distant. You cannot see where you are going. You just follow the person in front of you, who is following the person in front of them. Everyone shuffling forward in this strange, dark corridor that seems to go on forever. And then, just when you are starting to feel truly uncomfortable, when the darkness is pressing in and you're wondering if you made a terrible mistake spending half your week's wages on this, something happens. The hallway opens up, and you step out into paradise. The contrast is so extreme that you actually gasp. You are not alone. Everyone gasps the first time. They cannot help it. Because you have just walked from a cramped, dark, ordinary London hallway into what can only be described as a fairy tale made real. In front of you is the Grand Walk, a central avenue about 900 feet long, stretching away into the distance, and lining both sides of this avenue are enormous trees. Sycamores, elms, ancient and towering. Their branches reach overhead, creating a natural cathedral ceiling, and hanging from every single branch, swaying gently in the evening breeze, are lamps, hundreds of lamps, thousands of lamps. Glass lamps filled with oil, each one burning with a steady golden glow. They are everywhere. In the trees, along the pathways, suspended on wires between buildings, clustered around archways and statues. 15,000 lamps in total, though you do not know that yet. Right now you just know that you have never seen so much light in your entire life. The effect is magical. The glass lamps catch and multiply the light, creating an effect like stars brought down to earth. Everything glows. The paths are gravelled and pale, reflecting the light upward. The leaves of the trees shimmer. Even the people around you seem to shine, their silk and satin catching the lamplight, their faces soft and young and beautiful in this forgiving golden glow. It is like stepping into a painting or a dream, or the kind of place you imagine when someone reads you a story about enchanted forests and fairy balls. But here is the thing that makes it even more astonishing. All those lamps were not burning when you walked through the hallway. They could not have been, because at Vauxhall the lighting is a show in itself. As you stand there still catching your breath, still trying to take it all in, you hear a whistle, a sharp, clear whistle that cuts through the murmur of the crowd. And all around you, in the trees and along the paths, you see movement. Men, dozens of men, each standing next to a lamp or a group of lamps, each holding a taper, each waiting. The whistle blows again, and like magic, like the kind of coordinated magic that seems impossible but is happening right in front of your eyes, the lamplighters touch their tapers to the wicks. In less than 2 minutes, 15,000 lamps burst into life. You watch it happen in waves, starting from the entrance and rushing down the grand walk like a wave of light rolling into the darkness. The trees come alive. The pathways appear where before there was only shadow. Statues seem to materialize out of nowhere. Pavilions and archways and distant buildings all suddenly exist in this pool of golden radiance. It is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen, and you are not wrong to think so. A Prussian visitor named Jakob Friedrich von Bielefeld wrote about this exact moment in 1741. He said the lamps were lit with so astonishing a rapidity that in less than 2 minutes the whole garden appears as light as noonday. As light as noonday, in the middle of the night, in an age when most people live and die by the rhythm of the sun, when darkness means genuine, complete, dangerous blackness. This is like witnessing a miracle. This is technology that feels like sorcery. And it cost Jonathan Tyers a fortune. Lamp oil is expensive. Maintaining 15,000 lamps is a logistical nightmare. Paying dozens of lamplighters to stand ready every single evening all summer long is not cheap. But Tyers understood something that modern entertainment moguls would recognize instantly. Spectacle sells, wonder sells. The moment when someone walks from darkness into overwhelming light and beauty, that moment is worth everything, because that moment is what brings them back. That moment is what makes them tell their friends. That moment is what makes a housemaid save 6pence a week for 6 months just to feel it herself. You start walking down the grand walk because everyone is moving and you move with them. The gravel crunches under your feet. The music is clearer now. You can hear violins, maybe a harpsichord, voices singing something you do not quite recognize. Laughter bubbles up from somewhere to your left. 2 women sweep past you in enormous silk gowns, chattering in French. A man in a blue velvet coat tips his hat to you, and you're so surprised that you forget to respond. This is Vauxhall Gardens, and your night here has only just begun. But before we go any further into this enchanted space, before we explore the supper boxes and the dark walks and the secrets hidden in the shadows, we need to understand something important. We need to understand what you have really paid for with that 1 shilling. Because it is not just entry to a garden, it is entry to a revolution. A social revolution that will change how people think about class and public space and entertainment itself. And we will uncover that revolution together, step by step, as we spend this entire night wandering these glowing paths. So stay with me, keep your eyes open, and remember, in Vauxhall Gardens, nothing is quite what it seems. Now, I need to tell you about the moment that changed everything. The moment when Jonathan Tyers almost gave up on this entire enterprise. And one conversation with an artist friend saved not just Vauxhall Gardens, but created the very concept of public entertainment as we know it today. As to understand that moment, we need to talk about what made those 15,000 lamps more than just pretty lights. We need to talk about what you are actually seeing right now in this golden glow as you walk deeper into the gardens. You're standing in the middle of the grand walk, and your eyes are starting to adjust to the wonder of it all. The initial shock is fading, replaced by a growing curiosity, because now that you can actually see, you realize this place is massive. 12 acres of carefully designed landscape spreading out in all directions. Pathways branch off the main avenue, disappearing into shadows and mystery. Buildings peek through the trees, pavilions with pointed roofs, structures that look vaguely oriental, archways that frame distant vistas. And everywhere there are people, so many people. On a good night, and this is a very good night, there might be 1,000 visitors here, sometimes more. That fancy dress jubilee in 1786, 61,000 people crammed into these gardens. 61,000! Can you even imagine? But tonight it is just the usual crowd, which means you are surrounded by the most fascinating cross-section of London society you will ever see in one place. To your right, a group of young men in expensive coats are laughing too loudly at something, already drunk even though the night has barely started. To your left, an elderly couple walks arm in arm, the woman's dress so heavily embroidered it probably weighs more than you do. Just ahead, a cluster of servant girls like yourself are whispering and giggling, pointing at things, clearly as overwhelmed as you feel. And there, near one of the side pavilions, is that, yes, that is definitely a woman whose profession you can guess from the way she is leaning against a pillar, watching the crowd with calculating eyes. But here is what makes Vauxhall different from every other entertainment venue in London. Here is what makes it revolutionary. All of these people paid the same entrance fee. 1 shilling. The prince pays 1 shilling. The prostitute pays 1 shilling. The duchess pays 1 shilling. You pay 1 shilling. And inside these gates, at least in theory, you are all equal. Now that is not entirely true in practice. We are going to get into the complicated reality of class mixing later. But the idea, the radical, unprecedented idea, is that anyone who can scrape together 1 shilling can walk through that door and occupy the same space as royalty. There is no separate entrance for servants. No special section for aristocrats. Jonathan Tyers actually forbade servants from wearing their uniforms inside the gardens specifically to blur those class distinctions. If you are wearing livery, you are not getting in. Come dressed as yourself as a person, or do not come at all. This horrified some people. Horace Walpole, you will hear his name a lot in relation to Vauxhall because he could not stop writing about it, mentioned critics who thought it was scandalous that footmen and parlour-maids were mixing with countesses and clergymen. The natural order of society was being violated. How dare these common people breathe the same air as their betters? But Walpole himself thought it was admirable. He wrote that it was wonderful in a country of so much freedom to see princes and peeresses mixed with tradesmen and their wives, with apprentices and women of pleasure. Women of pleasure. That is his polite term for prostitutes, by the way, and they were definitely here. We will get to that. But first, let me tell you about the man who created all of this, Jonathan Tyers. Because everything you're experiencing right now, every lamp, every pathway, every carefully orchestrated moment, exists because one man had a vision and the stubbornness to see it through. Tyers was 27 years old when he leased this land in 1729. He was from Bermondsey, which means he was not aristocracy. He was a businessman, an entrepreneur, someone who saw an opportunity and went for it. The land had been called New Spring Gardens since at least 1660, mentioned by Samuel Pepys in his diary as a pleasant place to walk, though it had a reputation for being, shall we say, a bit too pleasant. Prostitution, drunkenness, the usual problems of any place where people gather without much supervision. Tyers wanted to change that. He wanted to create something respectable but exciting, moral but thrilling, profitable but culturally significant. And for his first few years, he was failing miserably. Imagine investing everything you have in a business venture, pouring your money and time and energy into creating something you believe in, and nobody comes. Or worse, the wrong people come. The gardens were not attracting the fashionable crowd Tyers needed. They were getting the same rough clientele as before. Tyers tried everything. He organised events, he hired musicians, he built structures. Nothing worked. He was on the verge of bankruptcy and despair. And then he talked to his friend William Hogarth. Now, if you know anything about 18th century art, you know Hogarth. He is the guy who painted and drew all those satirical scenes of London life. The gin-soaked streets, the corrupt politicians, the moral decline of society rendered in brutal, hilarious detail. His series like A Rake's Progress and Marriage a la Mode are basically the 18th century equivalent of a really dark television series about how society is going to hell. He was famous, he was talented, and he was friends with Jonathan Tyers. So Tyers, probably over several drinks, complained about his failing business. And Hogarth said something that changed everything. He said, "Why not make it about art?" Because here is the thing about London in the 1730s. There were no public art galleries. None. If you wanted to see art, real art, paintings by talented artists, you had to be rich enough to own it or connected enough to visit someone who did. Art was for the elite, for the educated, for people who had libraries and servants and country estates. Regular people never saw it, never had the chance to see it. And that, Hogarth suggested, was an opportunity. What if Vauxhall became the first place where ordinary people could see high-quality art just by paying a shilling? What if culture was democratized, made accessible, turned into entertainment? What if you combined the traditional pleasures of a garden, walking, music, food, with something that had only ever belonged to the aristocracy? Tyers loved it. He commissioned Hogarth and other artists from the St. Martin's Lane Academy to create paintings for the gardens. And not just any paintings. They created a whole program of art specifically designed for Vauxhall. Francis Hayman, who was incredibly talented, did most of the work, along with his students and assistants. Hubert Gravlow contributed designs, and Hogarth's work was copied and adapted to fill in gaps. But here is the brilliant part. Here is the detail that shows Tyers understood showmanship at a profound level. He did not just hang the paintings on walls like a normal gallery. He put them inside the supper boxes. Let me explain what a supper box is, because you are about to see them. Along both sides of the Grand Walk and scattered throughout the gardens are these small semi-private structures. Imagine a booth at a restaurant, but more elaborate. They are open to the garden on one side, but enclosed on the other, 3 sides with painted wooden panels. Each box has a table and benches, and on those back panels, on the walls you face while you are eating and drinking, are paintings. Large oil paintings, scenes from literature, mythology, contemporary life. Some are serious, some are playful, some are satirical, but all of them are good, really good. Created by legitimate artists who are at the top of their craft. And at a certain point in the evening, Tyers timed this carefully, all of the paintings would be lowered at once. They were on hinges, you see. They could swing down to provide privacy for the people dining in the boxes and simultaneously create a backdrop for the entire promenade. One moment the boxes are open to the gardens. The next moment down come dozens of paintings at once, creating an instant gallery all around you. People went absolutely wild for this. Suddenly, visiting Vauxhall was not just about drinking and dancing, it was about culture, education, improving yourself. You could tell your friends you went to see the new Hayman painting and nobody could judge you for it because you were engaging with art. Never mind that you also got drunk and flirted with strangers and ate overpriced ham. You were there for the culture. And this worked. The idea that a working person could pay 1 shilling and spend an evening surrounded by the same quality of art that hung in the houses of dukes. This was genuinely new, genuinely exciting. It transformed Vauxhall from a struggling garden into the most talked about venue in London. The Prince of Wales showed up. Frederick, Prince of Wales, who loved anything fashionable and new, attended the grand reopening in 1732 and gave Vauxhall his seal of approval. Suddenly, if you were anyone who mattered in London society, you had to be seen at Vauxhall. The gardens became the place to be, and Tyers, who had been on the edge of ruin, became wealthy, successful, influential. He ran Vauxhall for 38 years, from 1729 until his death in 1767, and during that time he turned a dodgy garden with a reputation for vice, into an institution that would define London nightlife for over a century. But, and this is important, he never fully solved the vice problem. He just made it more fashionable, more expensive, more discreet, because you cannot put 1,000 people together in a semi-dark garden with alcohol and music and private boxes and expect everyone to behave like they are in church. Human nature does not work that way, and Tyers, for all his talk about morality and improvement, understood that. He needed the gardens to feel slightly dangerous, slightly scandalous, slightly wild. That was part of the appeal, so yes, there were paintings. Beautiful, culturally significant paintings that made Vauxhall the first public art gallery in Britain. And yes, there were also dark corners where things happened that would make those paintings blush. Both things were true at the same time, and both were essential to Vauxhall's success. You're standing now near one of these supper boxes, trying to see the painting on the back wall. It is hard to make out in the lamplight, but you think it shows some kind of mythological scene. A woman, maybe Diana, in a forest. Or is it a pastoral scene? People in fancy dress having a picnic? You cannot quite tell. The person who just emerged from the box, adjusting his wig and looking very pleased with himself, does not seem to have been paying attention to the art at all. His companion, a woman whose dress is slightly more dishevelled than it was when she entered, is giggling. The box is empty now. You could sit in it. You could order food, but you already know you cannot afford that. The entry fee nearly killed your budget. You are going to walk and watch and soak in the atmosphere, and that will have to be enough. Most people here tonight are doing the same thing. Walking the paths, listening to the music, people watching. The supper boxes are for the wealthy, or for people on very special occasions, or for people engaging in business transactions that have nothing to do with food. But just being here, just occupying the same space, breathing the same air, watching the same people, that feels like enough. More than enough. It feels like you have slipped through a crack in the world and found yourself somewhere impossible. Somewhere that the rules are different, and anything might happen, and even a housemaid with 1 shilling can belong. Do you ever have moments like that? Where you are somewhere you technically have every right to be, but it still feels like you are getting away with something? Where you are surrounded by people who have more money, more status, more of everything than you will ever have, but for this one evening those differences seem to matter less. That is what Vauxhall offers. That is what Tyers understood. People do not just want entertainment, they want transformation. They want to feel, even if only for a few hours, like they're someone different, someone better, someone whose life is full of beauty and music and light. And the genius of Vauxhall, the thing that made it work when so many other pleasure gardens failed, is that Tyers delivered on that promise. He gave people actual beauty, actual music, actual light, not cheap imitations, not second-rate substitutes for what rich people had. No, he gave them the real thing. The same artists who painted for aristocrats, the same musicians who performed at court, the same level of spectacle and wonder that you would find at a royal celebration, all for 1 shilling. That is the revolution. Not just that different classes could mix, but that quality was available to anyone who could pay the entrance fee. This was cultural democracy in action, and it terrified the people in power even as they flocked to enjoy it themselves. Because if a servant girl can stand in front of the same painting as a duchess, if she can hear the same music, eat in the same garden, breathe the same perfumed air, even if she has to save for months to do it, then what does that say about the natural order of things? What does it say about who deserves beauty and who does not? These are dangerous questions, revolutionary questions, and Vauxhall asked them every single night, just by existing, just by opening its gates to anyone with a shilling, just by hanging fine art where working people could see it. And now, as you stand here in the glow of 15,000 lamps, surrounded by silk-clad strangers and distant music, you are part of that revolution. Whether you know it or not, whether you think of it in those terms or not, you're here, and that means something. That changes something, not just in society, but in you. The night is still young, the music is getting louder as more musicians arrive and warm up. Laughter echoes from the far pavilions. Someone is singing, their voice pure and high, cutting through the general murmur of conversation. The smell of food is starting to drift from the supper boxes. Roasted meat, fresh bread, something sweet you cannot quite identify. And you realize you are hungry. Not just for food, though that is real enough, but hungry for all of this, for experience, for beauty, for whatever comes next. So you start walking again, following the path as it curves away from the grand walk into more shadowed areas, following the music, following your curiosity, following that persistent human need to see what lies around the next corner. But before we follow you into those darker paths, before we discover what happens when the lamplight fades and the real Vauxhall reveals itself, we need to talk about what you are about to eat, or rather, what you cannot afford to eat, and why the food at Vauxhall Gardens became one of the most mocked aspects of the entire enterprise. Because nothing, absolutely nothing, reveals the contradictions of this place, quite like those supper boxes and their famously terrible portions. The smell hits you first, roasted chicken, definitely, maybe some kind of beef, fresh bread, butter, wine, and something sweet that makes your mouth water, despite yourself. The aroma is drifting from the supper boxes that line the main pathways, and it is making your stomach growl in a way that is absolutely not dignified. You try to ignore it. You knew you could not afford to eat here. You accepted that before you even crossed the river. But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it while surrounded by the smell of food you cannot have, those are very different things. So let me tell you about the most expensive, most disappointing, most hilariously inadequate meal you will never eat. There is a woman sitting in one of the open supper boxes right now. She is maybe 40, dressed in a gown that probably costs more than your yearly wages, and she is staring at her plate with an expression of profound betrayal. Her companion, a portly gentleman who keeps dabbing at his forehead with a silk handkerchief, is trying not to laugh. On the table between them sits their dinner, and I need you to understand what they paid for this meal. 1 slice of ham. 1. Not a generous slice, mind you. We are talking about a piece of meat so thin you can literally see the plate through it. Contemporary accounts describe the ham at Vauxhall as transparent, see-through, like someone took a normal slice of ham and then shaved it with a straight razor until it was more concept than substance. That slice of ham costs 1 shilling, the same price you paid to enter the entire gardens. Next to the phantom ham is a slice of chicken, again singular, 1 slice, carved so thinly it might blow away in a strong breeze. That is also 1 shilling. There is bread, but if you want butter with it, actual butter, the kind that makes bread worth eating, that will be an extra 2p. The bread itself is already a penny, which is about the normal price for a small loaf anywhere else in London. Except this is not a small loaf. This is a slice. 1 slice. For the price of a whole loaf? The wine is watered down, the portions are laughable, and yet people are paying these prices. Why? Well, partly because once you are here, what choice do you have? You already spent your shilling to get in. You're not leaving to find cheaper food and then coming back. And partly because, as insane as it sounds, eating here is part of the experience. Being seen eating here, in public, in one of these boxes, surrounded by art and music and fashionable people, that has value beyond the food itself. But mostly, people eat here because they do not know any better until it is too late. And then it becomes a joke, a tradition, something that regular visitors to Vauxhall love to watch happen to newcomers. That woman in the box right now, the one staring at her transparent ham, she is clearly a first-timer, and the gentleman with her, probably her husband based on the way he is trying to manage her disappointment, he has definitely been here before. He's remembering his own first meal at Vauxhall, his own shock at the prices and portions, and he's finding the whole thing amusing now that it is happening to someone else. There is actually a tradition at Vauxhall where regular patrons gather to watch the faces of newcomers when their food arrives. It is considered entertainment in itself. You can see it happening right now, a few boxes down. A young couple who look like they saved for months to afford this evening have just received their order. 4 shillings for what looks like it might sustain a small bird for about an hour. The young man's face goes through a whole journey: confusion, realization, anger, resignation, and finally a kind of grim determination to enjoy himself anyway, because he is not going to let overpriced food ruin his special night. And here is the thing that makes this even more outrageous. You can get a proper filling meal at an ordinary in the city for 6p. 6p! For something like a shilling, you could have a genuine feast at a chop house. Multiple courses, generous portions, probably some decent ale thrown in. The food at Vauxhall costs anywhere from 2 to 6 times what the same meal would cost literally anywhere else in London. And it is not even better quality. If anything, it is worse, because the kitchen is trying to serve potentially 1,000 people in a single evening, so everything is prepared in advance and kept warmish and served as quickly as possible. By 1823, we are jumping ahead a bit here, but the prices are worth mentioning. The costs had roughly doubled. A chicken would set you back 4 shillings. 4 shillings for one bird, probably a rather scrawny bird at that. When you consider that a working-class family might spend 4 shillings on food for an entire week, this starts to feel less like a restaurant and more like an elaborate prank. And yet Vauxhall's supper boxes were always full. Always, because this is what we would now call the experience economy, and Jonathan Tyers understood it perfectly. You're not really paying for food, you're paying for the story you will tell later. You're paying for the right to say you dined at Vauxhall Gardens. You're paying to be seen in these boxes, with art on the walls behind you and lamps glowing in the trees above you and music drifting through the air around you. Have you ever paid way too much for something just because of where you were? Concert venue food, airport coffee, theme park meals. You know it is overpriced. You know you are being taken advantage of. You buy it anyway because you are already there, you are already committed, and complaining about it would somehow ruin the magic of the moment. That is exactly what is happening here, except Vauxhall invented the concept. Tyers had to become a pioneer in mass catering to make this work. Think about the logistics. On a busy night, you might have 1,000 people all wanting to eat at roughly the same time. You need ingredients, cooking facilities, servers, dishes, tables, and somehow you need to coordinate all of this in an outdoor setting with no refrigeration, no modern stoves, just open fires and ice houses and prayer. The fact that anyone got fed at all is kind of impressive. The fact that they got fed badly and charged a fortune for it is just good business. The servers, by the way, make their living entirely on tips. They do not get wages from Tyers. Their entire income depends on how much food and drink they can sell, and how generous the customers feel. Which means they have every incentive to push the expensive items, to keep your glass full, to suggest just one more dish you absolutely must try. And if you're trying to impress a date, or show off to friends, or prove that you belong in this glamorous setting, you're probably going to say yes. You're going to order that second bottle of wine. You're going to get the fruit tart even though you're already full. Because saying no feels cheap. And tonight you are not being cheap. Tonight you are being sophisticated and worldly and generous. There is this wonderful detail in a memoir written by James Smith, who was writing about his friend Charles Dignam, one of the singers at Vauxhall in the early 1800s. Smith mentions that he wrote a song specifically for Dignam to perform, and the song was about the food at Vauxhall. The whole purpose of this song was to encourage people to actually buy food there instead of sneaking off to the cheaper gardens nearby. Because apparently, and this is absolutely hilarious, there was a place called Cumberland Gardens right next door, and at midnight, Vauxhall customers would slip away to eat there instead because the portions were larger and the prices were lower. Can you imagine? You pay 1 shilling to get into Vauxhall, you walk around enjoying the lamps and the music and the art, and then when you get hungry you sneak out to the budget version next door for actual food, and then you come back to Vauxhall for the rest of the evening. The servers were furious about this. They were losing money every time someone disappeared to Cumberland Gardens, hence the song, "Please, please eat our overpriced ham, do not abandon us for reasonable portions." I do not know if the song worked, but I kind of hope it did not, because there is something delightful about people gaming the system like that. Finding the loophole, getting the Vauxhall experience without bankrupting themselves on an invisible ham. But most people did not know about Cumberland Gardens. Most people just paid their outrageous prices and made the best of it. And honestly, some of them probably did not even care about the food. Because if you look at what else is happening in these supper boxes, if you pay attention to the way people are using them, you realize that food is often beside the point. Look at that box over there. 3 men in their 20s, expensive clothes, already drunk despite the fact that it is barely 9 o'clock. They have ordered wine, just wine, no food. They are not here to eat. They are here to drink and laugh and make increasingly bad decisions as the night goes on. That box to the left, 2 women who are definitely not eating, just sitting very close together, talking intensely, occasionally glancing around to see who might be watching them. That box in the corner, empty plates pushed aside, and now a transaction is happening. Money changing hands. For what? Could be anything. This is Vauxhall. The supper boxes are semi-private spaces in a public garden. They are visible from the pathways, so you can see who is in them and signal your status by being seen there. But they are also enclosed enough that conversations stay relatively private. They are perfect for business dealings, romantic assignations, political plotting, or just getting quietly drunk while the party happens around you. And when those paintings lower, when that wall of art comes down to create actual privacy, well, now you have a genuinely private room in the middle of a public space. What happens in that privacy is between you and whoever else is in the box with you. Tyers probably had his suspicions. He definitely knew that not everyone was using these boxes for innocent dining. But as long as they paid for the privilege, as long as they bought the overpriced wine and the transparent ham, he was happy to look the other way. There is a famous painting by Thomas Rowlandson, he painted and drew Vauxhall obsessively, that shows a supper box containing some very recognisable people. In the box you can see Samuel Johnson, the great writer and dictionary maker, along with his friend and biographer James Boswell. Next to them is Oliver Goldsmith, the author, and Hester Thrale, a society hostess. These are real people, all of whom visited Vauxhall regularly. And Rowlandson has captured the mid-meal, mid-conversation. Johnson looks grumpy, which is apparently how he looked most of the time. Boswell looks animated, probably telling some story. Goldsmith looks distracted. But the really interesting part of the painting is not the famous people in the box. It is everything else happening around them. To the right, the Prince of Wales is whispering to his mistress, Mary Robinson, who was an actress famous enough that everyone called her Perdita after one of her most celebrated roles. Her husband is there too, standing nearby with a crutch, watching the whole thing. How is that for awkward? A few feet away, the Duchess of Devonshire and her sister are walking arm in arm, probably gossiping about everyone they see. In the background, musicians are playing, people are dancing, and nobody is paying attention to the quality of the food, because that is not what matters. What matters is being there, being seen, being part of this glittering, complicated, slightly scandalous world where writers dine next to princes and servants brush shoulders with duchesses, and everything is lit by lamps that make everyone look beautiful and mysterious and important. You are still standing outside the boxes, by the way, still just watching, still hungry, but also starting to feel like maybe you made the right choice by not spending your last pennies on food that would not fill you up anyway. Better to stay hungry and save those pennies for the boat ride home. Better to walk and watch and soak it all in. And as you stand there, as you watch the woman finally taste her transparent ham and make a face that says she is deeply regretting her choices, you notice something. You notice that the really wealthy people, the ones in the most expensive dresses, the ones with servants hovering nearby even though servants are supposed to be banned, they are barely touching their food either. A nibble here, a sip there, but mostly they are talking, laughing, watching the crowd. For them, the meal is just a prop, an excuse to occupy the box, a way to be visible. It occurs to you that maybe everyone here is performing, playing a role. The wealthy are performing wealth, making sure everyone sees that they can afford to buy food they do not even eat. The servants and shop workers are performing sophistication, proving they belong in this space. The couples are performing romance. The businessmen are performing success. Even the prostitutes are performing, though their performance is more honest than most. They are here to work, and they are not pretending otherwise. And Vauxhall is the stage for all of these performances. Tyres built a theatre that runs every night, where the audience is also the actors, where everyone watches everyone else while pretending not to watch, where the food is terrible and overpriced and completely irrelevant because the real meal is the experience of being here, of belonging, of touching, however briefly, a life that sparkles. Your stomach growls again. You ignore it. You've been ignoring hunger your whole life. What is one more night besides you are starting to realize that you are full anyway? Full of light and music and possibility, full of the sight of all these people in all their complicated glory, full of the knowledge that you made it here. You are here right now and nobody can take that away from you. The path you are on is curving away from the main supper box area, heading toward parts of the gardens that are less well lit, more shadowed. You can still hear music, but it's different now, softer, more intimate. The laughter from the boxes is fading behind you, replaced by other sounds, whispers, the rustle of silk against silk, footsteps on gravel, quick and purposeful, and as the lamps grow farther apart, as the shadows grow longer and deeper, you realize you are heading into the part of Vauxhall that people only talk about in hushed tones, the part that gives the gardens their reputation, the part that is both the most exciting and most dangerous aspect of this entire enterprise. You are heading toward the dark walks, and before you take another step, before you venture into those shadows where anything might happen and frequently does, you need to understand what you are walking into. You need to know the stories, the warnings, the reality of what happens when the light fades and people disappear into the darkness. There are places in every city where the rules change, where the normal social contracts stop applying, where what happens in the light and what happens in the shadows are two completely different experiences. In 1750s London, one of those places was right here, in these paths you are about to walk down. They have several names depending on who you ask and how polite they are feeling. The Dark Walks, the Lovers' Walk, the Druids' Walk, but everyone knows what they really are. They are where Vauxhall stops pretending to be respectable. The transition is gradual at first. You are still on a proper gravel path, still within sight of the main areas, still able to hear the orchestra playing something cheerful in the distance. But the lamps are getting farther apart. The trees are thicker here, their branches creating a canopy that blocks out what little moonlight might have helped. And the people you pass are different. They're not strolling leisurely like they were on the Grand Walk. They are moving with purpose, couples walking quickly, not looking at anyone else. Single men scanning the shadows. Women in beautiful dresses standing very still near the trees, waiting. You should probably turn back. You know that, right? Every instinct you have, the ones that have kept you safe walking through London's dangerous streets, the ones that tell you when a situation is about to go wrong, all of those instincts are telling you that continuing down this path is a bad idea. But you're also desperately curious, and you're not alone. There are other people here, so it cannot be that dangerous, can it? Can it? Let me tell you about a woman named Evelina. She is not real. She is the heroine of a novel written by Frances Burney in 1778. But her experience in the dark walks is very, very real. Burney based this scene on actual events that happened regularly at Vauxhall. She knew what she was writing about. And what she wrote is terrifying. Evelyn is at Vauxhall with two female companions. Against her better judgment, they convince her to walk into the dark walks, the unlit paths away from the main gardens. And this is what happens. In Evelina's own words from the novel, "The sudden darkness made me hesitate." Already we are in trouble. Sudden darkness in a place full of people, that is intentional. That is designed. Our screams, she continues, were answered with bursts of laughter. Our screams, not scream singular, screams plural, meaning this is not one scary moment but an ongoing situation that is getting worse, and the response to their terror is laughter. The men who are doing this think it's funny. For some minutes we were kept prisoners, Evelina writes, till at last one of them, rudely seizing hold of me, said I was a pretty little creature. She manages to break free and run, but then she collides with another man who treated her equally roughly. This is not consensual flirtation. This is not playful romance. This is assault. In a public pleasure garden, where people paid money to supposedly enjoy themselves in a safe, regulated environment. And the novel makes clear that this is not unusual. This is what the dark walks are known for. Evelina was naive to go there. Her companions should have known better, but they went anyway, probably because the danger was part of the thrill, and now they are paying the price. Here is the thing that makes this even more disturbing. Frances Burney was writing fiction, yes, but she was not making this up out of whole cloth. She was reporting. By the 1750s, there were already documented complaints about what was happening in the dark walks. People called them dangerous terrors, notice the plural again, terrors, not terror, and there were regular reports of screams coming from that part of the gardens. Screams that went unanswered. Screams that other visitors learned to ignore because what were you going to do? Call the authorities? In a place that existed in this weird legal and social grey area, where the entire point was that normal rules did not quite apply. Jonathan Tyers knew about this. He had to know, and in 1764 he finally did something about it. He added lighting to the main Lovers' Walk. Not much lighting, not enough to really see what was happening, just enough to make it slightly less dangerous, just enough that he could say he tried. But he did not light all the dark walks. He could not, because, and this is the complicated part, the darkness was also the point. The danger was part of what made Vauxhall exciting. If you made it completely safe, completely visible, completely respectable, you would lose half your clientele. The people who came here specifically because it was a place where things could happen that could not happen anywhere else. Think about where you are in history right now. 1750s England. If you are an unmarried woman, you are basically never alone with a man who is not a family member. Never. You're chaperoned constantly. Your reputation is everything, and one wrong move can destroy it forever. There are no private spaces for romance or intimacy unless you are married or willing to risk total social ruin. And if you are a man looking to meet women outside your social class, or to engage in any kind of interaction that your family has not approved, where do you go? You cannot invite a woman to your rooms. You cannot be seen with her in respectable places. You need somewhere public enough to be accessible, but private enough to be discreet. Enter the dark walks, literally. These paths provided something that did not exist anywhere else in London, a space where different rules applied, where a merchant's daughter could meet the younger son of a nobleman and actually have a conversation without 12 people watching and judging, where arranged marriages could be temporarily forgotten and actual attraction could be explored, where people could be, for a few stolen moments, whoever they wanted to be with, whoever they wanted to be with. But that freedom, that privacy, that darkness, it also enabled terrible things. And Vauxhall's management was walking an impossible tightrope. Make it too safe, too well lit, too monitored, and you lose the excitement, the transgression, the whole appeal of the place. But let it stay completely dark and unpatrolled, and you are essentially running a crime scene disguised as a garden. The solution Tyers came up with was the most cynical, most pragmatic compromise imaginable. He hired constables, not many, not enough to actually patrol all the dark walks or prevent everything bad from happening, just enough to respond when things got really out of hand, just enough that he could claim he was doing something about the problem, and he made sure everyone knew the constables were there. There are advertisements from the period mentioning Vauxhall's security forces, emphasizing that the gardens are safe and well monitored, which was technically true but also wildly misleading, because having 6 constables in a 12-acre garden filled with 1,000 people, half of whom are drunk and many of whom are actively trying to avoid being seen, is basically the same as having no constables at all. Do you see what he is doing? He is protecting himself legally and financially while changing almost nothing about the actual experience. Brilliant and horrifying in equal measure. Now here is where it gets really complicated, because not everything happening in the dark walks was assault or crime. A lot of it, probably most of it, was consensual. People came here specifically to meet each other, to flirt, to kiss, to do things that would get them in serious trouble in any other public space in London. And for many people, the dark walks represented freedom, real, actual freedom to make their own choices about their own bodies and their own romantic lives. Edward Gibbon, the famous historian, wrote that Ranelagh Gardens was the most convenient place for courtships of every kind, every kind. He is being delicate, but we know what he means. And what was true at Ranelagh was even more true at Vauxhall. The dark walks were known as the place where anything could happen, where you could find anyone, where normal social barriers dissolved in the darkness. There were married couples sneaking away from stuffy dinner parties for a few moments of genuine privacy. There were young lovers whose families would never approve of their relationship. There were people exploring parts of themselves that society said should not exist. Men meeting men, women meeting women, people crossing class boundaries that were supposed to be uncrossable. And yes, there were prostitutes. Of course there were. High-class courtesans who could afford the entrance fee and dressed so well that you could not tell them apart from ladies of quality. They worked the dark walks the same way they would work any other public space, except here they had actual privacy to conduct their business. Here, their clients could approach them without being immediately obvious about it. Samuel Pepys, remember him from earlier, visiting the gardens in 1662, he wrote in his diary about having a sexual encounter with prostitutes in one of the private arbours. Just wrote it down matter of fact, like it was a perfectly normal part of his evening. And for him it probably was. Pepys was famous for his affairs and his detailed documentation of them. But the fact that he felt comfortable writing about it tells you something about how accepted this was as part of the Vauxhall experience. The darkness made it all possible. The darkness was permission. And the darkness was also danger. Both things true at the same time, impossible to separate. You are deeper into the dark walks now. The sounds from the main garden are distant, muffled by trees and darkness. You can barely see the path in front of you. There are lamps, but they are so far apart that you spend more time in shadow than in light. And you're starting to understand why people scream here. Not because something is definitely happening to them, necessarily, but because the darkness plays tricks on your mind. Because every rustling branch sounds like footsteps. Because you cannot see who is around you or what they are doing or whether they are watching you. Because your imagination fills in the gaps with every frightening story you have ever heard about what happens to young women alone in the dark. You are not alone, technically. There are other people on this path. You can hear them, but you cannot see them, and they cannot see you, and that makes it worse somehow. You could scream right now and nobody would know if you needed help or if you were just startled. Nobody would come running. Everyone would assume it was just another false alarm, another nervous visitor, another person discovering that the dark walks are genuinely dark and that darkness is genuinely frightening. A couple passes you going the other direction, walking fast, their heads down. You catch a glimpse of the woman's face in the brief pool of light from a distant lamp. She looks exhilarated, frightened but exhilarated, like she just got away with something. The man with her is grinning. They disappear back into darkness. To your left, deeper in the trees where there are no lamps at all, you hear laughter, low voices, the rustle of fabric. Something is happening there, something that wants to stay hidden. You do not look. Everyone knows you do not look. That is the unspoken rule of the dark walks. You mind your business, and everyone else minds theirs, and nobody acknowledges what is obviously happening in the shadows, except sometimes people do not mind their business. Sometimes people do not respect boundaries. Sometimes the darkness and the alcohol and the general atmosphere of transgression make people think they can do whatever they want without consequences. There are documented cases, court cases, published accounts, letters, diaries of assaults at Vauxhall. Women robbed, women attacked, men beaten and robbed, pickpockets working the crowds knowing that people are distracted and unlikely to call for help, even if they realize what is happening. Confidence men running scams. All of it happening in these paths, in this darkness, in this space that exists outside normal social rules. But here is the part that makes this a genuinely interesting historical moment rather than just a crime story. Despite all of this, despite the assaults and the prostitution and the pickpockets and the drunken violence, people kept coming. Thousands of people, night after night, summer after summer, for over 100 years. They knew the risks, they knew the stories, and they came anyway. Why? What was so appealing about a place that was this dangerous? I think it is because danger is not a bug, it is a feature. Humans are drawn to edges, to boundaries, to places where the rules get fuzzy and anything might happen. We like being slightly scared. We like not knowing exactly what's going to occur next. We like spaces where we can test ourselves, where we can feel brave, where we can have stories to tell later about the time we walked through the dark walks at Vauxhall and survived. And maybe, if we're honest, we also like having the option of transgressing, of doing things we should not do, of being people we cannot be in our normal, regulated, supervised lives. The dark walks offered that. They offered the possibility of transformation, of escape, of becoming, however briefly, someone whose life included risk and passion and secrets kept in the darkness. Is that worth the danger? That is a question every single visitor to Vauxhall had to answer for themselves. and judging by the crowds, most of them answered, yes, yes, it is worth it. Yes, I will take the risk. Yes, I want to see what happens when I walk into the darkness and see what I find there. But not everyone felt that way. Not everyone thought the trade-off was acceptable. By the 1830s, as Victorian morality started to take hold, the dark walks became increasingly controversial. People started calling for them to be closed, or at least properly lit and patrolled. Respectable families stopped coming to Vauxhall specifically because of its reputation. The gardens started to decline, partly because the very thing that made them exciting, the transgression, the danger, the freedom from normal rules, became unacceptable to a society that was becoming more concerned with public decorum and respectability. But in 1750, on this night, in this moment, as you stand in the darkness trying to decide whether to keep walking or turn back to the safety of the lamp-lit paths, Victorian morality has never happened yet. Right now, this is just how things are. This is London, this is Vauxhall, this is the price you pay for freedom. You take a breath, you keep walking. Because you did not come all this way, did not spend half your wages, did not cross the river in the dark just to turn back at the first hint of danger. Besides, you can see light ahead. The path is curving back toward the main gardens. You are almost through the darkest part, just a little farther. And as you walk, as the lamps get gradually closer together and the sounds of music and laughter grow louder, you realize something. You survived the dark walks. Nothing bad happened to you. You were frightened, yes. Uncertain, absolutely. But you made it through, and now you have a story. Now you can say you walked the dark walks at Vauxhall Gardens and you know what they are really like. Not just what people say about them, what they actually are. You emerge back into the light, back into the populated areas where people are eating and drinking and dancing and laughing. And the contrast is jarring. It's like two different worlds existing in the same space, separated only by a few hundred yards and the absence of lamps. Everything here is bright and cheerful and safe feeling, even though you now know from experience that safety is just an illusion. That the darkness is always there, just past the edge of the light, waiting for anyone brave or foolish enough to venture into it. But that is a thought for later. Right now, your heart is still beating fast from the fear and the thrill and the strange exhilaration of having done something risky and survived. And you are starting to understand why people come back to Vauxhall again and again. It is not just the lights or the music or the art. It is the whole package, the beauty and the danger, the refinement and the transgression. The fact that you can go from viewing high art to walking through lawless darkness to dancing in lamplit pavilions all in one evening. Where else in the world can you experience that? Where else gives you that range of possibility, that intensity of contrast, that sense that anything could happen at any moment? Nowhere. This is unique. This is Vauxhall. And your night here is far from over. In fact, the most spectacular parts are still ahead. Because while you were navigating the dark walks, while you were learning about the complicated relationship between light and shadow, freedom and danger, the gardens were preparing for their next act. The musicians are gathering, the singers are warming up their voices, and soon, very soon, you are about to experience the reason Vauxhall became famous across Europe. You are about to discover what happens when you combine the best musical talent in England with an outdoor venue designed for perfect acoustics and an audience already primed for wonder. The sound reaches you before you can see where it is coming from. A single violin, pure and clear, cutting through the general noise of conversation and laughter. Then another violin joins it. Then a viola, a cello. A harpsichord adding delicate runs of notes that sparkle like the lamps overhead. Within moments, what started as one instrument has become an entire orchestra, and the effect is so beautiful that people actually stop talking to listen. You turn toward the sound and see, rising above the trees and the supper boxes, a structure that looks like something out of a fairy tale. The orchestra, capital O, because this is not just a bandstand or a stage, this is an architectural statement, a Gothic-inspired pavilion with pointed arches and decorative woodwork, tall enough to project sound across the entire gardens, elaborate enough to signal that what happens here matters. This is where Vauxhall's soul lives. This is where the magic gets made. And the people making that magic are some of the most talented musicians in England. Jonathan Tyers did not hire amateurs or second-rate players. He could not afford to. The music at Vauxhall had to be genuinely good, not just good enough for a garden party, but good enough to compete with concert halls and royal performances and private salons where the wealthy went to hear the finest musicians of their generation. So he hired the finest musicians of this generation, and he paid them well enough that they kept coming back, summer after summer, creating a tradition of musical excellence that would define Vauxhall for over a century. Let me tell you about some of these people because they deserve to be remembered. Thomas Arne was probably the most famous English composer associated with Vauxhall in its early years. He was London-born, classically trained, and absolutely brilliant at writing music that felt both sophisticated and accessible. He built up Vauxhall's musical programme in the 1730s and 40s, composing pieces specifically for the gardens, training singers, working with the orchestra to create performances that people would talk about for weeks afterward. And in 1740 he wrote something at Vauxhall that is still famous today, nearly 3 centuries later. Rule Britannia. You know this song. Even if you do not think you do, you do. It has been used in everything from British patriotic ceremonies to movies to commercials. It is one of those pieces of music that has transcended its original context and become part of the cultural fabric. And it premiered here at Vauxhall Gardens, performed by an orchestra standing in that Gothic pavilion while 1,000 people listened and the lamps glowed in the trees overhead. Can you imagine being there for that? For the very first performance of something that would become iconic? Not knowing yet that this tune would outlive everyone in the gardens that night, would be sung by millions of people who had never heard of Vauxhall or Thomas Arne, would become synonymous with the nation's identity. You were just there for a nice evening out and accidentally witnessed history. That happened at Vauxhall constantly. History being made in the middle of entertainment. Art being created for an audience that included duchesses and pickpockets and servants who saved for months just to be there. Arne's first wife Cecilia was a celebrated vocalist who performed regularly at Vauxhall. Her voice was apparently extraordinary. Clear, powerful, technically perfect, emotionally moving. The kind of voice that could fill these open-air spaces and still make you feel like she was singing directly to you. She was a star. People came specifically to hear her, and the fact that she was married to the main composer created this perfect artistic partnership that elevated everything Vauxhall did musically. But Vauxhall did not just feature established stars. They also showcased new talent, rising performers, people who would go on to become famous but who got their start singing in these gardens. In 1764, something happened at Ranelagh Gardens, Vauxhall's more expensive, more exclusive rival, that gives you a sense of what the musical scene was like across all the pleasure gardens. A child performed. An 8-year-old boy from Austria, travelling with his father, was invited to give a concert. His name was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, 8 years old, and already so talented that the finest musical venue in London wanted to feature him. He played his own keyboard compositions for an audience of wealthy patrons who probably had no idea they were watching one of the greatest musical geniuses in human history at the very beginning of his career. Leopold Mozart, Wolfgang's father, wrote letters home describing the experience, clearly proud and probably a bit overwhelmed by the reception his son received. Now, this happened at Ranelagh, not Vauxhall, but it tells you something important about the musical culture of these gardens. They were not just entertainment venues, they were tastemakers. They were places where careers were launched, where reputations were made, where musical innovation happened in public rather than hidden away in aristocratic salons. And Vauxhall, being larger and more democratic than Ranelagh, featured even more musicians, more variety, more chances for people to discover new sounds and new styles. On any given night, you might hear orchestral pieces in the latest continental style, English ballads, comic songs, serious opera arias, folk tunes arranged for full orchestra, patriotic anthems, love songs, drinking songs, bawdy songs that made the respectable ladies blush and the less respectable ladies laugh. There was a composer and performer named James Hook who worked at Vauxhall for nearly 50 years. 50 years. From 1773 to 1820, he was the organist and composer at Vauxhall Gardens, and during that time he wrote over 2,000 songs. 2,000, most of them specifically for Vauxhall, specifically for this audience, specifically designed to work in this space. 2,000 songs. Think about that level of productivity. That is averaging about 40 songs per year for 50 years. Every summer, Hook had to come up with new material, new melodies, new lyrics, because the Vauxhall audience was sophisticated enough to notice if you just recycled the same stuff year after year. They wanted novelty. They wanted to hear something they had not heard before, so Hook gave them novelty, over and over and over again. Most of those 2,000 songs are forgotten now. They were designed to be popular in the moment, not to last for centuries. Tuneful, easy on the ear, emotionally accessible, but not necessarily groundbreaking. The 18th century equivalent of pop music, basically. Meant to be enjoyed and then replaced by the next catchy tune. But a few of Hook's songs did last. His most famous was called Sweet Lass of Richmond Hill. It was a love song, sentimental and sweet, about a beautiful young woman from Richmond, and it became so popular that people were still singing it decades after Hook died. Even now, if you search for it, you can find recordings. It had been covered by classical singers, folk musicians, even used in movies. All because Hook wrote a pretty tune for a summer evening at Vauxhall Gardens. The orchestra you are listening to right now might include some of the finest musicians in London. On Sundays, these same players might be performing in major churches, playing sacred music for services. During the week, they come to Vauxhall and play secular music for crowds of people eating overpriced ham and flirting in the dark walks. And they do not see this as a contradiction. This is just work. Good work, well-paid work, artistically satisfying work. Because here is something people often get wrong about historical attitudes toward music. We tend to think of classical music as this rarefied, elite thing that only sophisticated people appreciated. But in the 18th century, music was everywhere. It was popular entertainment. Street musicians, church choirs, tavern singers, military bands, opera houses, concert halls and pleasure gardens. All of it was just music. Some of it was more complex, some was simpler, some required trained musicians, and some could be performed by anyone. But it was all part of the same cultural ecosystem. Vauxhall fit into that ecosystem perfectly. The music here was good enough to satisfy serious music lovers, accessible enough to appeal to people who just wanted something pleasant to listen to while they walked around, and varied enough that everyone could find something they enjoyed. And the variety was genuinely impressive. You might hear a full orchestral piece by Handel. Yes, George Frideric Handel, one of the greatest composers of the Baroque era, had a long association with Vauxhall and premiered work here. Then after that serious piece, you might hear a comic song about a milkmaid and a soldier that would make you laugh out loud. Then a beautiful aria sung by a talented soprano that would make you cry. Then a drinking song that everyone would join in on, even people who could not carry a tune. In April 1749, something happened at Vauxhall that illustrates both how important the gardens were to London's musical life and how completely chaotic things could get when people were really excited about an event. Handel was preparing for a major royal celebration, a fireworks display in Green Park to commemorate the end of the War of Austrian Succession. He composed a special piece for the occasion called Music for the Royal Fireworks, and before the actual royal event, he decided to hold a public rehearsal at Vauxhall Gardens. Just a rehearsal, not even the main performance. A rehearsal. 12,000 people showed up. 12,000 to hear a rehearsal at a garden that normally held maybe 1,000 people comfortably. The crowd was so enormous that it created a traffic jam on London Bridge that lasted 3 hours. 3 hours of carriages and horses and pedestrians all trying to get to Vauxhall at the same time, all crammed onto a bridge that was barely wide enough for normal traffic, all desperate to hear Handel's new piece. And the crush was so intense that the central arch of the bridge collapsed, just gave out under the weight and pressure of all those people and vehicles. Nobody was killed, miraculously, but it must have been terrifying. And it did not stop people from trying to get to Vauxhall. Even with the bridge partially collapsed, people kept coming. They took boats. They found other routes. They were determined to hear this music. That is how powerful Vauxhall's reputation was. That is how much people cared about music, about being present for something special, about being able to say they were there. 12,000 people willing to risk a dangerous bridge, willing to wait for hours in traffic, willing to deal with massive crowds and chaos just to hear a rehearsal. And Handel delivered. Of course he did. The music for the royal fireworks is magnificent, dramatic, celebratory, full of the kind of grand gestures and emotional power that Handel was famous for. The people who fought their way to Vauxhall that night got their money's worth. But here is what I find really interesting about this story. It is not just that 12,000 people showed up, it is that they could show up, that there was a venue where you could hear Handel for the price of admission to a public garden, that a housemaid who saved her pennies and a duchess in a silk gown and a merchant and a prostitute and a pickpocket could all be in the same crowd, listening to the same music, experiencing the same moment of transcendent beauty. That is revolutionary. That is genuinely new in human history. Before pleasure gardens like Vauxhall, music of this caliber was for the elite. You heard it if you were wealthy enough to hire musicians or connected enough to be invited to private concerts or devout enough to attend church regularly, where there was a good organist. Regular people did not get access to Handel. They did not get to hear the best singers and the finest orchestras and the latest compositions, but Vauxhall changed that. Vauxhall said, if you can pay 1 shilling, you can hear the same music that royalty hears. And that shift, that democratization of culture, rippled out through society in ways we are still feeling today. Think about modern concert venues. Think about music festivals. Think about any place where you can buy a ticket and hear live music regardless of who you are or where you come from. That model started here, at Vauxhall, with Jonathan Tyers deciding that culture should be accessible and profitable at the same time. The orchestra is playing something slower now, something sweet and melancholy. You do not recognize it, but it does not matter. The melody is lovely, and it suits the evening perfectly. The lamps are glowing. The air is warm, but not too warm, with just enough breeze to make the tree branches sway slightly. People are dancing nearby on a section of pathway that's been cleared for that purpose, their movements graceful and unself-conscious. And woman is singing. Her voice rises above the orchestra, clear and powerful, and everyone within earshot stops what they're doing to listen. You cannot see her from where you're standing, but you can hear her perfectly. The acoustics in these gardens are surprisingly good. Something about the way the trees are arranged, the shape of the pavilions, the open air that lets sound travel without the muddiness you would get in an enclosed space. She is singing about love, of course. They are always singing about love, lost love, found love, forbidden love, triumphant love. Love is the universal theme that never gets old, that everyone can relate to regardless of their station in life. And this singer, whoever she is, whatever her name is that you will never know, is making you feel that love, that longing, that bittersweet ache of wanting someone you cannot have or missing someone who is gone. Do you have music that does that to you? Songs that transport you somewhere else? That make you feel things you have been trying not to feel? That open up your heart in ways that feel dangerous and necessary at the same time? That is what this singer is doing right now for 1,000 people scattered across Vauxhall Gardens. She is giving them permission to feel, to remember, to hope. And when she finishes, when the last note fades into the night air and there is that perfect moment of silence before the applause begins, you feel something shift inside you. You came here for the spectacle, for the experience, for the bragging rights of having been to Vauxhall, but you are getting something more, something deeper. You are getting art, real art, performed beautifully, offered freely to anyone who can hear it. The applause when it comes is thunderous. People are cheering, throwing coins toward the orchestra pavilion, tips for the performers, donations to show appreciation. The wealthier patrons are throwing silver. Most people are throwing pennies if they were throwing anything at all, but the enthusiasm is universal. Rich and poor alike are applauding and are showing that they recognize what they just heard, that they value it, that they are grateful for it, and the musicians are already preparing the next piece, because the night is young and the crowd wants more, and there are hours of music still to come. Different styles, different moods, different performers. The programme at Vauxhall is carefully designed to give you variety, to keep you interested, to make sure there is something for everyone. But the music, as important as it is only one element of the spectacle. Because Vauxhall does not just assault your ears, it assaults all your senses at once. The lamps for your eyes, the music for your ears, the food for your taste, however disappointing the portions might be. The smell of flowers and trees and perfume and food and wine all mingling together. The feel of gravel under your feet and silk brushing past you, and the warm night air on your skin. And soon, very soon, as the evening deepens and the real darkness settles in beyond the reach of the lamps, there will be more. There will be spectacle on a scale that will make everything you have seen so far seem like a warm-up act. There will be things that defy belief, that seem like magic, that make you wonder if you have somehow stepped out of the regular world into a dream. But before we get to that, before the fireworks start and the real show begins, there is one more piece of Vauxhall's puzzle we need to explore. One more aspect of this place that makes it unique, that makes it notorious, that makes it the subject of endless gossip and moral panic and fascinated obsession. We need to talk about what happens when you give people masks and costumes and permission to be anyone other than themselves for one night. We need to talk about the masquerades. Walking toward you right now is a chimney sweep. At least that is what he appears to be. Covered in soot, wearing rough workers' clothes, carrying a brush over his shoulder. Except his boots are made of leather so fine they probably cost more than a real chimney sweep makes in a year. And when he passes close enough for you to see his face, you realise his soot is actually carefully applied theatrical makeup. And the woman on his arm, dressed as a milkmaid with an elaborate costume that no actual milkmaid could ever afford, is wearing a diamond necklace that catches the lamplight and throws little sparks of brilliance into the air. This is a masquerade night at Vauxhall, and nothing, absolutely nothing, is what it seems. Masquerades were particularly popular in the 1730s and 40s, though they continued throughout Vauxhall's history. These were special events. usually announced weeks in advance, where the normal rules of dress and behaviour were suspended in favour of something far more interesting: costumes, masks, anonymity, the chance to be for one night anyone you wanted to be, and people went absolutely wild for it. The first major masquerade at Vauxhall happened in 1732, and it was attended by Frederick, Prince of Wales himself. This was a huge deal. Royal patronage meant respectability, meant fashionability, meant that everyone who mattered in London society would want to attend future events. But the masquerade also created a problem that would define these events for decades to come. How do you maintain respectability when everyone is wearing masks and pretending to be someone else? The answer, it turns out, is that you do not. You just pretend to try while actually letting things get fairly outrageous, because the outrageousness is the entire point. Jonathan Tyers had complicated feelings about masquerades. On one hand, they were incredibly profitable. He could charge extra for masquerade nights, sometimes as much as 2 or 3 shillings instead of the usual one. People would pay it because masquerades were special occasions, events you prepared for, nights you told stories about for years afterward. And the crowds were enormous. Everyone wanted to attend. Everyone wanted to see and be seen, even if being seen meant being disguised. But Tyers also wanted Vauxhall to be moral, improving, respectable. He genuinely believed that pleasure gardens could elevate public taste and behaviour, and masquerades were, well, not exactly known for their morally improving qualities. So in 1732, for that first big masquerade with the prince in attendance, Tyers tried something interesting. He created a centrepiece display designed to warn people about the dangers of vice. 5 tableaux representing the House of Ambition, the House of Avarice, the House of Bacchus, the House of Lust, and the Palace of Pleasure. These were elaborately decorated structures with figures and scenes showing the terrible consequences of giving in to various temptations. The message was clear. Look at all these sins. Look at where they lead. Be warned. Be better. The audience's response was equally clear. We did not come here to be lectured. We came here to enjoy ourselves. Thank you very much, but we will take our chances with the House of Lust. The tableaux were not a success. People found them preachy and boring and kind of insulting, actually. Because if you think about it, Tyers was essentially saying, come to my pleasure garden, pay extra for this special event, and then let me tell you that seeking pleasure is sinful. The hypocrisy was a bit much, even for people who were generally okay with hypocrisy. So Tyers learned his lesson. Future masquerades dropped the moral messaging and focused on spectacle. And spectacle is what people wanted. Picture what these events looked like. Thousands of people, all in costume, filling every pathway and pavilion and supper box. The variety was staggering. You would see gods and goddesses from classical mythology, Diana the huntress, Apollo with a golden lyre, Venus in flowing robes, heroes from literature and history, medieval knights in armour, pirates, Roman senators, shepherds and shepherdesses from pastoral poems, animals, people dressed as lions, bears, birds, fantastic creatures that existed only in imagination. And then there were the inversions, the playing with social hierarchy that was the real appeal of masquerade for many people. Aristocrats dressed as chimney sweeps, as we have already seen. Wealthy merchants dressed as beggars. Men dressed as women. Women dressed as men. Servants saving up for months to rent costumes that let them dress as nobles for one night. Have you ever been to a costume party where you felt like you could be a different version of yourself? Where the costume gave you permission to act in ways you normally would not? To be bolder or sillier or more flirtatious? That is what masquerades did, but amplified by the fact that in the 18th century there were so few opportunities to break social rules that when one came along, people took full advantage. The masks were crucial to this. not just because they hid your identity, though that was important, but because they created this shared fiction that everyone agreed to participate in. You knew that the chimney sweep was probably a nobleman. He knew that you knew. But as long as he was wearing the mask, you both pretended to believe the disguise. You played along. And in that play, that temporary agreement to treat fiction as reality, anything became possible. A woman could talk to a man she was not related to without a chaperone present. Because technically, how would the chaperone even know if it was her? She was masked. It could be anyone. A merchant could approach an aristocrat as an equal. A forbidden couple could spend an entire evening together without anyone recognizing them. Political rivals could have conversations they could never have in daylight. Business deals could be made. Affairs could begin. Secrets could be shared. All because of a piece of silk or paper mache covering the face. There is a print from 1780 showing a fashionably dressed woman at Vauxhall holding a fan in front of her face, shielding herself from the gaze of three men who are clearly trying to get her attention. She is not wearing a full mask, but the fan serves the same purpose. It creates a barrier. It gives her control over who sees her and when. And the men are frustrated by it, which seems to be exactly what she wants. The caption of the print makes it clear that this is about flirtation, about the game of revealing and concealing, about power dynamics and sexual politics all playing out in a public garden under the guise of innocent entertainment. But masquerades could also get darker. There are accounts of people using the anonymity to commit crimes. Pickpocketing was rampant at masquerade nights, even more than usual. Because how do you identify a thief when everyone is in costume? Con artists would work the crowds, pretending to be wealthy or connected, striking up conversations with marks they had researched in advance, using the mask as cover for their deceptions. And then there were the sexual assaults. Women lured into the dark walks by men pretending to be someone they were not. Or men assaulted by groups who thought the anonymity meant there would be no consequences. The masks that enabled freedom also enabled violence. Both things, always both things, true at the same time. Tyers hired extra security for masquerade nights. He had to. The regular constables were not enough when you had several thousand people. Most of them drunk, many of them wearing masks. All of them convinced that normal rules did not apply. But even with extra security, things happened. Stories circulated, scandals erupted. There was one masquerade in the 1740s, I wish I could tell you the exact date, but the records are frustratingly vague, where a prominent married woman attended dressed as a shepherdess and spent the entire evening with a man who was definitely not her husband. They were not particularly discreet about it. They sat together in a supper box. They walked the paths arm in arm. They disappeared into the dark walks for suspiciously long periods. And because she was masked, because everyone was pretending they did not recognize anyone, nobody could officially acknowledge what was happening. But everyone knew that was part of the thrill, the pretense of anonymity while actually being recognized. The game of I know that I know who you are, but we are all going to pretend we do not know. It was theatre. Performance. A collective agreement to maintain a fiction that nobody actually believed. And the next day London society would be buzzing with gossip. Did you hear who was at the masquerade? Did you see what they were wearing? Did you notice who they were with? The masquerade was not just the event itself. It was also the conversations that happened afterward, the speculation, the scandal, the delicious sense of having witnessed something scandalous that you could now share with everyone who was not there. Vauxhall's masquerades became so famous that they were written about constantly. Novels featured scenes at Vauxhall masquerades. Plays referenced them. Political cartoons used them as settings. They became shorthand for a certain kind of aristocratic decadence, a certain type of morally questionable entertainment that was simultaneously condemned and eagerly attended. But here is what interests me most about the masquerades. They were not just about wealthy people playing dress-up. They were also accessible, or at least more accessible than most elite entertainments, to regular people. Yes, Tyres charged extra, but 2 or 3 shillings, while expensive, was still within reach for someone who saved up. You could not attend every masquerade, but you could attend one, and if you were strategic about it, if you borrowed a costume from friends or made something yourself, you could participate in this extraordinary social experiment for less than the cost of a decent pair of shoes. And that meant that masquerades genuinely mixed classes in ways that were otherwise impossible in 18th century England. A servant girl in a rented costume of a Roman goddess was, for that night, indistinguishable from a merchant's daughter in a similar costume. They moved through the same spaces, ate the same overpriced food, danced to the same music, had access to the same experiences. Of course, class still mattered. The quality of the costume, the confidence of the bearing, the way someone moved and spoke, all of these gave clues to their real status. But the masquerade created just enough ambiguity that interactions could happen that would be unthinkable anywhere else. There are stories, probably apocryphal, but who knows, of servants meeting and falling in love with people from higher classes at Vauxhall masquerades, with the relationship only falling apart later when the masks came off and reality reasserted itself. Cinderella stories, essentially. The ball where everyone is equal, followed by the harsh morning when the coach turns back into a pumpkin. But even if those stories are not literally true, they represent something true about what masquerades meant to people. Hope, possibility, the idea that maybe, just maybe, you could transcend the circumstances of your birth. Maybe you could be, even temporarily, someone different, someone better, someone whose life included romance and adventure and all the things that were supposed to be reserved for people born into the right families. You're watching a masquerade right now, even though this is not technically a masquerade night, because it is late enough in the evening that some people have started to blur the lines between ordinary dress and costume. That woman over there has flowers woven through her hair and ribbons trailing from her sleeves in a way that is too elaborate to be everyday wear. She is performing femininity, turning herself into a walking garden. That group of young men has painted their faces, not quite masks, but definitely more theatrical than normal. And there, disappearing into the shadows, is someone in an actual mask. A black silk domino that covers the upper half of their face, leaving only the mouth visible. Are they hiding, playing, conducting business they do not want observed? Impossible to say. That is the point. You find yourself wondering what it would be like to wear a mask, to walk through these gardens as someone else, to have conversations without the weight of your real identity pressing down on every word, to be free, just for a few hours, from the expectations and limitations that define your daily life. Would you be bolder, kinder, crueler, more honest, or less? Would the mask reveal something true about you by hiding your face, or would it just let you lie more convincingly? These are dangerous questions, transformative questions. The kind that, once asked, change how you see yourself and the world around you. And Vauxhall asked them constantly, just by existing, just by creating spaces where transformation was possible. The music from the orchestra is shifting now, becoming faster, more energetic. People are dancing in earnest, forming circles and lines, laughing as they miss steps or spin too fast. The atmosphere is building towards something. You can feel it in the air, in the way people are moving and talking and drinking. The evening is reaching its peak, and then you hear it, a sound like thunder except sharper, more defined. A boom that echoes across the gardens and makes everyone stop and look up at the sky. The fireworks are starting. This is what everyone has been waiting for. This is the finale, the spectacular conclusion to an evening of music and art and food and flirtation and fear and freedom. This is Vauxhall showing off, demonstrating that they can do things nobody else can do, that they can literally light up the sky with beauty and noise and wonder. But before we watch the fireworks together, before we tilt our heads back and see the darkness explode into colour, we need to understand something about what fireworks meant in the 18th century. We need to understand the technology, the expense, the danger, and the sheer ambition of trying to create spectacle on this scale. Because these are not modern fireworks. These are something far more unpredictable, far more genuinely thrilling, and occasionally far more deadly than anything you would see today. Another boom splits the night, and this time you see it. A streak of fire shooting upward from somewhere beyond the trees, climbing higher and higher until it seems to touch the stars themselves. And then it explodes, not with the neat, controlled burst of modern pyrotechnics, but with a ragged, violent spray of sparks that spread across the sky like a flower blooming in fast motion. Red and gold and white cascading down in streams of light that make everyone gasp and point and grab the arms of whoever is standing next to them. This is dangerous beauty. This is chemistry and fire and human ambition combined in a way that could go spectacularly wrong at any moment. And that possibility of disaster is part of what makes it so thrilling. Fireworks in 1750 are not the precisely engineered spectacles you're used to. These are handmade, each one slightly different from the last. Each one containing a mixture of gunpowder and metal compounds that someone calculated by hand, using recipes that were as much art as science. Sometimes they work exactly as intended. Sometimes they explode too early or too late or not at all. Sometimes they explode in directions nobody anticipated, sending burning debris into the crowd or setting trees on fire. This has happened multiple times. At various pleasure gardens across London, there are records of fireworks going wrong, injuries, fires, chaos, and yet people keep coming to watch them, keep paying extra for firework displays, keep standing in crowds directly underneath of explosives being launched into the air. Because the spectacle is worth the risk. Because this is the closest thing to magic that technology can currently produce. Vauxhall started including fireworks in their programming in 1798. That is relatively late in the garden's history. They'd been operating for almost 70 years by that point. But by the end of the 18th century, as competition with other pleasure gardens intensified, and the original novelty of lamps and music started to wear off, Vauxhall needed something bigger, something that would make people choose them over Ranelagh or Marylebone or any of the dozens of other entertainment venues in London. Fireworks were the answer. They were expensive to produce, which meant not every garden could afford them. They were spectacular in a way that nothing else could match, and they satisfied an audience whose appetite for novelty, for bigger and bolder entertainment seemed to grow every year. The investment was enormous. You're not just paying for the fireworks themselves, though those are costly enough. You're paying for the people who design them, specialists, often from the continent, who understood the chemistry and physics involved. You're paying for the setup, the launch platform, the safety measures such as they were. You are paying for the risk. Because if something goes wrong and people are injured, that is a lawsuit and a scandal and a potential end to your business. But Vauxhall could afford it. By the late 1700s, the gardens were making serious money. They had survived for decades, had established themselves as an institution, had royal patronage and a reputation that brought in crowds summer after summer. So they invested in fireworks. And the gamble paid off. Another rocket goes up. This one is different. It climbs more slowly, leaving a trail of gold sparks behind it. And when it explodes, it does something you've never seen before. It bursts into multiple smaller explosions, each one creating its own shower of colour. Blue this time, a deep rich blue that seems impossible, that makes you wonder what they put in the mixture to create that particular shade. The crowd around you is completely focused on the sky. All the conversations have stopped. All the flirting and drinking and performing has paused. Everyone is just watching, faces turned upward, eyes wide, mouths slightly open, united in wonder. The prince and the servant and the prostitute and the merchant all experiencing the same moment of awe. Have you ever been in a crowd where everyone is focused on the same thing? Where all the individual concerns and differences fade away for a moment because you are all witnessing something bigger than yourselves? That is happening right now. 1,000 people having the exact same experience at the exact same time. That is rare. That is precious. That is worth whatever it costs to get here. The fireworks continue. Some shoot straight up and explode into perfect circles. Some arc across the sky and burst into trails of falling stars. Some spin in place, creating wheels of fire that rotate for several seconds before burning out. And some just make noise, enormous booms that you feel in your chest, that shake the ground under your feet, that are more about power and drama than visual beauty. There is a moment between explosions when the sky is dark again and everyone is waiting for the next one. The anticipation is almost better than the fireworks themselves. That held breath, that collective wondering about what will come next, that delicious uncertainty. And then 3 rockets go up at once, from different locations around the gardens, converging in the center of the sky and exploding simultaneously in red and white and gold. The timing must have been incredibly difficult to coordinate. Someone had to light 3 separate fuses at exactly the right moments, accounting for the different distances and trajectories, making sure they all arrived at the same point at the same instant. And they pulled it off. The effect is stunning. The noise is incredible. Not just from the explosions themselves, but from the crowd. People are cheering, applauding, shouting encouragement as if the fireworks can hear them and will perform better with an enthusiastic audience. Someone near you is crying, tears of joy, of overwhelm, of something she cannot quite name but feels deeply. You realize you are crying too. When did that start? You did not even notice. But there are tears on your face and your throat is tight, and you feel this enormous upwelling of emotion that has nothing to do with the fireworks specifically and everything to do with what this night has been. The journey across the dark river, the explosion of light when you walk through that hallway, the music, the food you could not afford, the dark walks with their promise of danger and freedom, the masks and the performances, and the constant sense that reality is thinner here, easier to slip through. And now this, fire in the sky, proof that humans can create beauty on a scale that rivals nature itself, evidence that wonder is possible, that transcendence is real, that ordinary life can be interrupted by moments of pure spectacle that change something inside you. The fireworks display at Vauxhall usually lasted about half an hour. That is what you are paying for when you attend one of these special nights. 30 minutes of coordinated explosions, carefully designed to build in intensity, to vary in style and colour, to create a narrative arc that has a beginning, a middle, and a climactic finale. By the 1830s, we are jumping forward in time now past the period we have been focusing on, but the evolution is important. Vauxhall's fireworks had become incredibly sophisticated. They would create set pieces, 3-dimensional structures that incorporated fireworks to tell stories. There is a record of one display that recreated a naval battle, complete with ships made of wood and canvas that were set on fire while fireworks exploded around them to represent cannon fire. Hundreds of people worked on that production. It cost a fortune, and it was over in half an hour. That is the nature of fireworks. Ephemeral, expensive. gone almost as soon as they appear, which makes them perfect for Vauxhall actually, because everything about this place is about the temporary, the fleeting, the sense that this moment will never come again quite like this. You cannot preserve a night at Vauxhall, you cannot bottle it or take it home or recreate it somewhere else. The magic only works here, only works because all these elements, the lights, the music, the crowds, danger, the beauty, are combined in this exact way, at this exact moment. And then it is over, and all you have left are memories and the faint smell of gunpowder drifting through the trees. Another series of explosions, faster now. The finale is building. Rocket after rocket, barely any pause between them, filling the sky with so much light and colour and noise that it stops being individual fireworks and becomes a continuous experience. An assault on the senses, too much beauty to process. Too much stimulus to hold in your mind all at once, and then just when you think it cannot possibly get more intense, it does. A massive rocket, bigger than anything you've seen so far, launches with a roar that sounds like the world ending. It climbs so high you lose sight of it in the darkness, and when it finally explodes, it is not one colour but all of them. Every shade they know how to create all at once, spreading across the entire visible sky. The crowd goes absolutely wild. People are screaming, jumping, hugging strangers, throwing their hats in the air. This is it. This is the moment they will talk about. This is why they came. And then, as suddenly as it started, the fireworks stop. The sky goes dark. The echoes fade. And there is this perfect crystalline moment of silence where nobody knows quite what to do. The show is over. Reality is reasserting itself. But nobody wants to leave just yet. Nobody wants to break the spell. Slowly, gradually, the normal sounds of Vauxhall return. Conversations resume. The orchestra starts playing again. Something gentle, soothing, designed to bring people down from the adrenaline high of the fireworks. Laughter drifts through the trees. People start moving toward the supper boxes, or the pathways, or the exits. But something has changed. You can feel it in the way people are moving, the way they are talking. They are softer now, quieter. The wild energy of the masquerades and the dark intensity of the dark walks have been transformed into something else, something contemplative. The fireworks forced everyone to stop performing for a few minutes, to just be human beings watching beautiful things explode in the sky. And coming back from that, returning to the social games and the pretense feels harder now. You find yourself thinking about time, about how quickly this evening has passed. You arrived just after sunset, and now it must be close to midnight. Hours have gone by in what feels like minutes. Soon you will have to leave. We'll have to find a waterman to take you back across the river. We'll have to return to your regular life with its work and its limitations and its utter lack of fireworks. But you are not ready to leave yet. None of the people around you are ready either. They are lingering, holding on to the night for as long as they can. Because once you walk back through that narrow hallway, once you step into a boat and head back toward London proper, this stops being real. It becomes a memory, a story you will tell, an experience that happened to a version of you that only exists in this garden, under these lamps, surrounded by this particular combination of beauty and danger and possibility. Someone bumps into you, apologizes profusely even though it was barely a touch, and you realize they are drunk. Very drunk. Most people here are, at this point in the evening. The wine and punch have been flowing for hours, and people's judgment is impaired in ways that will probably lead to regrets in the morning. You've been careful of barely drunk anything because you could not afford it, and also because you wanted to remember this night clearly. You wanted to be present for it, not watching through the haze of alcohol. That decision is paying off now. You can see everything with perfect clarity. The way the lamps are starting to burn lower, their oil running out. The way people's costumes are dishevelled, masks askew or removed entirely. The way the careful social performances of earlier in the evening have dissolved into something messier, more honest. This is when the real scandals happen. This is when people make decisions they will spend weeks trying to justify or explain or cover up. But you are not here for scandal, you are here for experience, for the once-in-a-lifetime feeling of having attended Vauxhall Gardens during their golden age, for the knowledge that you were part of this incredible social experiment, this attempt to create a space where art and commerce and democracy and danger all exist together in precarious balance. The fireworks are over, yes, but the night is not. There are still hours of entertainment ahead. There are still parts of Vauxhall you have not explored, still experiences you have not had. And as you stand there still tasting gunpowder smoke in the air, still seeing after images of coloured light when you close your eyes, you have to decide what to do next. You could head toward the exits, could call it a night and go home with your memories intact. You could find more food, though the thought of spending your remaining pennies on another slice of transparent ham is not appealing. You could walk back into the dark walks, now that you know what to expect, and see what happens when the crowd is drunk and uninhibited and the rules have completely dissolved, or you could do something else. Something unexpected. Something that would turn this already extraordinary night into a story you will tell for the rest of your life. Because Vauxhall is not done with you yet. There are still secrets here, still surprises waiting, still moments of transformation available to anyone brave enough to seek them out. And as you think about this, as you weigh your options and feel the night stretching out before you with all its dangerous possibilities, you notice something happening at the far end of the gardens. People are gathering, moving towards something with purpose and excitement. You cannot see what they are looking at from here, but whatever it is has captured their attention completely. Curiosity wins. It always does. You start walking toward the crowd, wondering what new spectacle Vauxhall has prepared, what innovation or entertainment could possibly top fireworks. And as you get closer, as you start to hear the excited chatter and see people pointing at the sky, you realize what is happening. They are preparing for something that will not become common for several more decades. Something that represents the cutting edge of technology and human ambition. Something so new and dangerous and thrilling that just witnessing it will change how you think about what is possible. They are preparing to launch a hot air balloon. And if you are very lucky, if you're very brave, you might get to see someone actually ride it into the night sky. The balloon is enormous. That is your first thought when you push through the crowd and finally get close enough to see it properly. You have heard about hot air balloons, of course, everyone has. They are the sensation of the age, the technology that proves humans can finally actually fly. But hearing about something and seeing it are completely different experiences. This balloon is made of fabric, silk or treated canvas, you cannot tell in the lamplight, painted in brilliant stripes of red and gold and blue. It is lying partially inflated on the ground right now, like a sleeping giant, with several men working around it, checking ropes, adjusting equipment, preparing the brazier that will heat the air and make the whole contraption rise. The basket beneath it looks almost comically small compared to the vast expanse of fabric. Just a wicker container, maybe 6 feet across, with a metal frame supporting the brazier. That is it. That is the entire vehicle that will carry someone into the sky. The man who will be riding in that basket is standing nearby, talking to the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who has done this many times before. His name is Captain William Henry Adams Jr., though most people just call him Captain Adams, and he is famous, not just in London, but across England. He is one of the premier aeronauts of his generation, the pilot of the Royal Vauxhall balloon, and he holds records for distance and duration that have made him a celebrity. This is not 1750 anymore. We have jumped forward in time because hot air balloons did not become a regular feature at Vauxhall until the 1830s. By then, the gardens had been operating for over a century. They were showing their age, losing ground to newer forms of entertainment, struggling to stay relevant to audiences who had seen it all before. So they invested in the newest, most thrilling spectacle they could find. They bought a balloon and hired Captain Adams, and they turned balloon ascents into scheduled entertainment. And it worked. People came in droves to see it. Because watching a balloon ascent in the 1830s was like watching a rocket launch today. It was cutting-edge technology. It was dangerous. It was proof that the impossible was becoming possible right before your eyes. Captain Adams is explaining the process to the crowd, his voice carrying over the excited chatter. He is describing how the brazier works, how the heated air makes the balloon lighter than the surrounding atmosphere, how the whole thing is controlled by adding or releasing ballast. Some people in the crowd are listening intently, trying to understand the science. Others are not paying attention to the words at all. They are just staring at the balloon, at the basket, at Adams himself, trying to comprehend the fact that this man is about to voluntarily climb into that tiny wicker cage and let fire and physics carry him into the night sky. Would you do it? If someone offered you a ride in that balloon right now, would you get in? Or would the fear be too much, the risk too great, the whole concept too insane to seriously consider? Adams seems to have no fear whatsoever. He is smiling, joking with people in the front row, completely relaxed. But then he has done this dozens of times. In 1836, he piloted this very balloon on a journey that set a record. 772 kilometres. From right here, from Vauxhall Gardens in London, all the way to Weilburg in Germany. 772 kilometres in a wicker basket hanging beneath a bag of hot air. Do you understand how insane that is? How many things could go wrong? The balloon could tear, the brazier could malfunction, the winds could carry you out over the ocean. You could run out of fuel or ballast, and you could freeze at altitude, you could crash on landing, and there is no backup system, no safety net, no emergency protocols beyond hope for the best. And yet Charles Green, that is the name of the aeronaut who actually held the record for that Germany flight, with Adams as his assistant, made that journey successfully. He landed safely, having travelled farther than anyone had ever travelled by balloon before. And when he came back to England, he was a hero. Newspapers covered his achievement. People celebrated him. He gave lectures, wrote accounts, became famous for having risked his life for the sake of human progress and spectacle. That is the world these aeronauts inhabit. They are part scientist, part performer, part daredevil. They understand the technology well enough to usually not die. But they also understand showmanship, understand that their value is not just in going up, but in making it look thrilling and dangerous and worthy of the ticket price. Vauxhall charged extra for balloon ascent nights. Of course they did. This was premium entertainment, the kind of thing you told your grandchildren about. I was there the night Captain Adams flew out of Vauxhall Gardens. I saw him rise into the darkness and disappear into the clouds. That story was worth the extra shilling or two. The crew is working faster now. The brazier is lit and you can see flames leaping inside the metal frame, heating the air, sending it up into the balloon. The fabric is starting to move, to billow, to fill out. What was a collapsed heap on the ground is becoming a sphere, rounded and tight and straining against the ropes that hold it down. The crowd presses closer. Everyone wants to see, wants to be able to say they were right there when it happened. You're getting jostled, pushed, but you hold your ground. You're not missing this. Not after everything else you've experienced tonight. Adams is climbing into the basket now, not rushing, not showing off, just methodically going through his pre-flight routine, checking the brazier, testing the ropes, making sure everything is secure. His movements are practiced, efficient, the actions of someone who has done this so many times it is almost boring. Except it is not boring. It will never be boring. Every ascent is a new risk, a new gamble with physics and fate. There is a young boy in the crowd near you, maybe 10 years old, staring at the balloon with his mouth open. His father has him up on his shoulders so he can see better, and the boy is gripping his father's head so tightly his knuckles are white. He is terrified and thrilled in equal measure. This is the kind of thing that shapes a childhood, that becomes a core memory that he will carry with him for the rest of his life. Years from now, when he is old and the world has changed beyond recognition, he will still remember the night he saw a man fly out of Vauxhall Gardens. You wonder if he will also remember the smoke from the fireworks still hanging in the air, the sound of the orchestra playing something triumphant and martial, the way the lamps made everything glow gold, the smell of the brazier, harsh and metallic, the feeling of being part of a crowd that was holding its collective breath, waiting for the miracle to happen. Adam signals to his crew. They start releasing the ropes, one at a time, carefully, making sure the balloon rises evenly and does not tip. The basket lifts off the ground. Just a few inches at first, then a foot, then several feet, and suddenly it is clear that this is really happening. The balloon is flying. Adams is ascending. Gravity is losing. The crowd erupts, cheering, shouting, applauding, some people laughing from sheer nervous excitement. The boy on his father's shoulders is screaming with delight, and you find yourself cheering too, adding your voice to the general roar of approval and amazement. The balloon rises faster now, 10 feet off the ground, 20, 30. Adams waves down at the crowd, perfectly calm, completely in control, or at least appearing to be in control. From down here you cannot see his expression clearly enough to know if he is truly unafraid or just very good at hiding his fear. Higher and higher. The balloon is above the trees now, above the lamps, rising into the darkness that exists beyond Vauxhall's sphere of light. And as it climbs, it starts to drift. The wind is catching it, pulling it east, carrying Adams away from the gardens and toward the rest of London, toward the river, toward wherever the currents of air decide to take him. People are running now, trying to follow the balloon's path, not wanting to lose sight of it. You run too, joining the stream of people racing through the gardens, dodging supper boxes and other spectators, trying to keep the balloon in view for as long as possible. But it is rising too fast, drifting too far. Within minutes, it is just a dark shape against the slightly less dark sky, visible only when it passes in front of a star or when the brazier flares and illuminates the fabric from within. And then even that is gone. Adams is somewhere up there, alone in the night sky, trusting in physics and luck and his own considerable skill to bring him safely back to Earth. The crowd slows, stops running, stands in scattered groups talking excitedly about what they just witnessed. Some people are placing bets on where Adams will land. Others are discussing the technical aspects of the flight, arguing about how high he went, how far he will travel, how long he can stay aloft. And a few people, mostly older, more cynical, are talking about what happens when these things go wrong, when balloons catch fire or crash or drift out over the ocean and are never seen again. Because that happens too. Ballooning in the 1830s is incredibly dangerous. Yes, Adams has a record for distance travelled, but there are also records of aeronauts who died, who fell from the sky or burned or froze or simply vanished. The technology is new enough that every flight is still an experiment, still a test of whether humans really belong in the air or whether gravity will eventually win. You realize you are holding your breath and you force yourself to exhale. Adams is fine. He does this all the time. He will land somewhere in the countryside east of London, probably in a field that will terrify whatever farmer owns it, and he will pack up his balloon and make his way back to Vauxhall to do it all again next week. This is his job, his profession, his life. But the fear you feel is real. The understanding that you just watched someone risk death for your entertainment is real. And it adds weight to the experience, makes it more than just a fun spectacle. It makes it meaningful, worth remembering, worth the price you paid to be here. The crowd is dispersing now, heading back to other parts of the gardens or toward the exits. The show is over. The balloon is gone, and people are left with that strange mix of exhilaration and letdown that comes after any intense experience. What do you do after you watch a man fly? How do you go back to ordinary concerns after witnessing something extraordinary? You find yourself thinking about the progression of the evening, how it started with the simple magic of lamps lighting up at once, then music, then food and social performances, then the dark walks with their complicated mix of freedom and danger, then masquerades and their promise of transformation, then fireworks, and now this, each spectacle bigger than the last, each one pushing the boundaries of what seems possible a little further. Vauxhall has been building to this all night, training you to accept wonder, to expect the impossible, to believe that anything might happen here. And it worked. You believed. You are still believing. Even though you are exhausted and your feet hurt and you have spent more money than you should have, and you need to find your way back across the river soon, you are still caught up in the magic of it. That is the genius of Vauxhall. Not any single element, but the combination. The orchestration of multiple forms of entertainment, multiple assaults on the senses, multiple opportunities for transcendence. By the time you get to the balloon ascent, you are primed for it, ready to be amazed, willing to believe that a man can fly because you have already seen so many other impossible things tonight. And there is still more, because Vauxhall is not done with you yet. The night is deep now, moving toward that strange hour when it is too late to be evening and too early to be morning. Most of the families have gone home. The children are in bed. The respectable middle-class visitors have departed. And what is left is a different crowd. Younger, drunker, more willing to push boundaries, more interested in what happens when the lamps burn low and the rules dissolve completely. This is when Vauxhall becomes what it has always been underneath all the cultural pretensions and artistic ambitions. This is when it becomes a playground for adults who want to misbehave. A space where consequences feel distant and desire feels immediate, and the morning seems impossibly far away. You should probably leave. You know this. Every sensible part of you is saying it is time to go, to head back to your regular life, to end this adventure while you still have good memories and no regrets. But you are not ready. Not yet. You want to see what Vauxhall looks like at this hour. You want to know what happens when the performance ends and the reality underneath is revealed. So you stay. You walk slowly back toward the main gardens, not rushing, just observing. Watching the way people move differently now that the crowd has thinned, listening to conversations that are more honest, more raw, less performed. Seeing couples disappear into the dark walks with clear intent. Watching servers clean up the supper boxes while the remaining patrons ignore them entirely. And as you walk, as you absorb this different version of Vauxhall, you start to understand something important. Something about the relationship between the fantasy and the reality, between what Vauxhall pretends to be and what it actually is, between the lights and the shadows, the music and the silence, the spectacle and the mundane work that makes spectacle possible. Because while you were watching fireworks and balloon ascents, someone was refilling the lamps, someone was cooking that overpriced food, someone was sweeping the paths and managing the crowds and dealing with the inevitable problems that come when you put 1,000 drunk people together in a dark garden. The magic you experienced was built on labour. invisible, undervalued labor that made everything else possible. And that realization does not diminish the magic exactly, but it complicates it, makes you think about who profits from your wonder and at whose expense, makes you see Vauxhall not just as a visitor experiencing its pleasures, but as a system, an economy, a machine designed to extract money from your pocket while making you feel like you are getting something invaluable in return, which you are. You are getting experience, memory, story, the ability to say you were there, but you're also being used, exploited even, in the gentle way that all entertainment exploits its audience. And both things are true simultaneously, and you cannot decide which one matters more. The orchestra has stopped playing. The musicians are packing up their instruments, moving with the tired efficiency of people who have done this 1,000 times and will do it 1,000 more. Without the music, the gardens feel different, quieter, less magical, more like what they actually are. A commercial enterprise designed to separate you from your money as pleasantly as possible. But even in this stripped-down state, even with the illusions fading and the reality showing through, Vauxhall is still beautiful, still special, still worth whatever you paid to be here, because the memories are real, the wonder you felt was genuine, and nobody can take that away from you, no matter how clearly you see the machinery behind the magic now. You find yourself near the entrance again, the same narrow hallway you walked through hours ago when the night was young and full of promise. People are streaming through it now in the other direction, heading home, ending their evenings. Some look satisfied, some look disappointed, some look like they're going to regret this night for a very long time, and you have a choice to make. You can join them. Walk through that hallway back to ordinary life. Cross the river, go home, sleep, wake up and return to your regular existence with this one perfect night as a memory to sustain you. Or you can stay just a little longer. See what Vauxhall looks like when almost everyone has gone, when the lamps are burning out and the staff is cleaning up and the garden returns to being just a garden, just trees and paths and buildings, empty of people and magic and spectacle. When you can see it clearly, without the performance, without the crowds, without any illusions left at all, you decide to stay. Something about this moment feels important, like if you leave now you will miss the real truth of what Vauxhall is. So you turn away from the exit and walk deeper into the gardens, moving against the flow of people heading home, choosing to see what happens when the performance ends and only the stage remains. The first thing you notice is how much darker it is. Not all at once, but gradually lamp by lamp, sections of the gardens are going dark as the oil runs out or as workers extinguish them deliberately, conserving resources now that most of the paying customers have left. The pathways that were brilliantly lit hours ago are now pools of shadow with occasional islands of light, and in those shadows you can see the real work of Vauxhall happening. A young man, maybe 16, is collecting glasses from the supper boxes. His arms are full of them, stacked precariously, and he's moving quickly, efficiently, clearly trying to finish his work so he can go home. He does not look up as you pass. You are not important to him. You're just another customer, another person who came here for pleasure while he worked. While he cleaned up after you, how much does he make for a night of this labour? Probably not much. Definitely not enough to ever attend Vauxhall as a guest. He exists in this space but will never experience it the way you have. He sees the lamps, but only as things that need to be maintained. He hears the music, but only as background noise to his work. He walks through the dark walks, but only to pick up abandoned items, or break up fights, or respond to emergencies. Do you ever think about the people who make your experiences possible? The invisible labour that supports your leisure? Of course you do. You're a servant yourself. You know exactly what it is like to work while others play, but it hits differently when you're on the other side, when you are the one being served, when someone else is cleaning up your mess. There is a woman scrubbing one of the tables in a supper box, her hands red and raw from whatever harsh soap she is using. She looks exhausted. It must be well past midnight now, and she's probably been working since before the gardens opened, preparing food, serving customers, dealing with the constant demands of people who are paying for the privilege of treating her like furniture. And she will probably be back here early in the morning to do it all again, because summer at Vauxhall is an endless cycle of preparation, performance, clean up, repeat. You want to say something to her. Thank you, maybe. Or I see you. Or I understand what this costs. But what would be the point? She does not need your gratitude. She needs fair wages and reasonable hours and dignity. And Vauxhall, for all its democratic pretensions, for all its claims to be accessible to everyone with a shilling, is not set up to provide those things to its workers. The gardens are built on a contradiction. They promise equality. Anyone can enter. Anyone can experience beauty and culture and entertainment. But that promise is built on the labour of people who will never have enough money or time to enjoy what they are creating. The magic you experienced tonight was made possible by people who are excluded from the magic. And Vauxhall is not unique in this. Every pleasure garden, every theatre, every restaurant, every space of entertainment operates the same way. Beauty for some, labour for others. Does knowing this ruin the beauty? Does it make your evening less meaningful? Or does it add another layer of understanding, another dimension to what you experienced? You're not sure. Both, maybe. The wonder is real and the exploitation is real, and somehow you have to hold both truths in your mind at the same time. You keep walking. The Grand Walk is nearly empty now. Just a few people scattered along its length, some sitting on benches looking exhausted, some still wandering in small groups, not ready to let the night end. And at the far end, near where the orchestra pavilion stands dark and silent, you see something that makes you stop. A couple is dancing. Just the two of them. No music, no audience except you and a few other stragglers. They are moving slowly, carefully, like they are afraid of breaking whatever spell they are under. The woman is wearing a dress that might have been beautiful earlier in the evening, but is now dishevelled, stained, coming apart at the seams. The man's coat is buttoned wrong. Neither of them seems to care. They are in their own world, having their own perfect moment, and the fact that Vauxhall is closing around them does not matter at all. You watch them for a minute, feeling like an intruder, but unable to look away. This is real. This is genuine. Whatever is happening between these two people, it is not performance, not pretense, not part of the show. It is just human connection, happening in the ruins of the evening's spectacle, more beautiful in its simplicity than any firework or balloon could ever be. And you realise this is why Vauxhall works. Not because of the spectacle, though that helps. Not because of the art or the music or the innovation, though those matter too. But because it creates spaces, temporal, physical, emotional spaces, where people can have moments like this. Where a couple can dance alone to music only they can hear. Where a servant can save for 6 months and spend one evening feeling like someone who matters. Where a prostitute and a prince can occupy the same garden and maybe, just maybe, see each other as human beings rather than symbols or transactions. The couple stops dancing. They stand close together, foreheads touching, saying something you cannot hear. Then they separate, straighten their clothes, and walk toward the exit hand in hand. You watch them go and wonder what their story is. Are they married? Engaged? Having an affair? Meeting for the first time? You will never know. They will disappear back into London, and you'll never see them again. And the only thing you will remember is this moment of unexpected beauty in the dying hours of Vauxhall's night. A sound behind you makes you turn. One of the workers, A different one, older, with the weathered face of someone who has spent decades in outdoor labour, is starting to extinguish more lamps. He has a long pole with a snuffer on the end, and he's working systematically down the line, bringing darkness behind him as he goes. "Gardens are closing soon, Miss Deere," he says when he notices you watching. His voice is not unkind, just tired. "Best make your way to the boats if you need a ride home." "How much longer?" you ask. He glances at the sky, calculating. "Half an hour, maybe. Long enough to finish the clean-up and lock the gates. You're welcome to stay until then, but there will not be much to see. Just us workers and the rats." The rats. Right. Of course there are rats. This is London. There are rats everywhere, and a pleasure garden full of food scraps is rat paradise. During the day, with thousands of people around, the rats stay hidden. But now, in the quiet darkness, they will come out to feast on whatever the guest left behind. Somehow this detail feels important. Final proof that Vauxhall, for all its magic, is still just a physical place. Still subject to the same mundane realities as anywhere else. Still part of the city, not separate from it. "I will leave soon," you tell him. "I just wanted to see it like this. Quiet." He nods, understanding more than you said. It is different, is it not? When the crowds are gone, some people prefer it this way. More honest, somehow. More honest. Yes, that is exactly it. This version of Vauxhall, stripped down and closing up, is more honest than the glittering spectacle. Not better, necessarily, but truer. He moves on, continuing his work, and you are left standing in the increasing darkness. More lamps go out, more of the garden disappears into shadow, and you start to see it as it will be in a few hours, when the sun comes up. Just a garden, trees and paths and buildings, empty of people, empty of magic, waiting for the whole cycle to begin again. Do you know that feeling when a party ends? When the music stops, the lights come up and you see the room in harsh clarity for the first time, all the spilled drinks and scattered decorations and general mess that was invisible in the dim festive lighting. That is what is happening now. Vauxhall is revealing itself, showing you what it looks like without the performance. And it is still beautiful, just differently. The trees are still majestic, the architecture is still impressive, the pathways are still well designed, but without the people, without the lights and music and energy, it is just a space. Potential waiting to be activated by the next crowd, the next evening, the next cycle of spectacle and commerce. You think about Jonathan Tyers, dead now for many decades, but still haunting this place, still shaping what happens here through the systems he created, the traditions he established, the model of entertainment he pioneered. Did he understand what he was creating? Did he know that Vauxhall would become an institution, a cultural touchstone, a place that defined an entire era of London life? Probably not. Probably he was just trying to make money and avoid bankruptcy and maybe create something beautiful in the process. Probably he had no idea that his pleasure garden would last for over a century, would inspire imitators across Europe and America, would become so famous that the word Vauxhall itself would become synonymous with pleasure gardens in multiple languages. The Polish word foxhol comes from Vauxhall. In Russia, Vauxhall means train station, because the first Russian train stations had entertainment gardens attached to them modelled on Vauxhall, and eventually the word for the garden became the word for the station itself. Tyers created something so influential that it changed language, that it outlived him by centuries, that it defined what public entertainment could be. But he also created something temporary, something that could not last forever despite its influence. Because you are standing in Vauxhall in its decline. By this point, whether we are in the 1750s or the 1830s or somewhere in between, the exact date matters less than the trajectory. The gardens are already past their peak. The fashionable crowds are starting to drift away. Competition is increasing. The surrounding city is encroaching on what used to be rural escape. Vauxhall will close eventually. In 1859, to be specific. The owners will declare bankruptcy, the land will be sold, the lamps will be packed away or discarded. The paintings will be removed, the buildings will be demolished, and the 12 acres that once held such magic will be turned into ordinary London housing, factories, streets. Nothing special, nothing magical, just more city. But that has not happened yet. Right now, in this moment, Vauxhall still exists. Still offers its peculiar combination of beauty and commerce, freedom and danger, spectacle and exploitation. Still gives people like you the chance to cross a river and step into another world for an evening. You hear the sound of water in the distance. Ooh. The Thames, always present, always waiting, your way home, your return to ordinary life. The boats will be running for a little while longer, ferrying the last stragglers back to the north bank. You should probably start walking that direction, should probably end this adventure before it ends for you, but you take one more walk around the garden first. One last circuit of the main pathways, moving through the dying light, saying goodbye to each section as you pass it. The supper boxes now empty and dark, the orchestra pavilion silent and abandoned. The pathways that led to the dark walks, less threatening now, just shadowy lanes between trees. The open areas where people danced and laughed and performed for each other. All of it is still here, all of it still exists, but without the people, without the activation of human presence and desire and energy, it is dormant. Sleeping, waiting. You pass the spot where the balloon launched. There is nothing there now except disturbed grass and the faint smell of smoke. Captain Adams is long gone, landed somewhere miles away, probably already planning his next ascent. The spectacle has moved on, leaving only traces behind, and finally you find yourself back at the entrance. That narrow hallway that leads through the proprietor's house and back into regular London. You can see people ahead of you moving through it, emerging on the other side into darkness and reality, the last trickle of visitors leaving their dream behind. You take a breath, you smooth down your dress, check that you still have the few pennies you need for the boat ride home. You prepare yourself for the transition, for the loss of magic, for the return to your regular life with its work and its limitations and its complete lack of fireworks or balloon ascents or mysterious dark pathways. And then, just before you step into that hallway, you turn back one more time. You look at Vauxhall, really look at it, trying to memorize this moment. The way it looks in the dying lamplight, the way it feels to stand here knowing what you know now, having experienced what you experienced, carrying all of it with you. This is what you came for, not just the spectacle, though that was wonderful, not just the music or the art or the food, though those had their value, but this feeling, this sense of having lived fully for one evening, of having stepped outside your normal existence and found something extraordinary waiting there, of having proof that magic is possible, even if it is expensive and exploitative and temporary and built on the labour of people who never get to experience it themselves. You take all of that with you, pack it away in your memory, hold it close, because this is yours now. Nobody can take it away from you. Not the workers cleaning up, not the owners counting their profits, not the passage of time or the eventual closure of the gardens or anything else that the future holds. You are here. You experienced this. You know what Vauxhall was at its best and its worst, its most magical and most mundane. And carrying that knowledge, that experience, that story with you, you finally turn away from the garden and start walking toward the exit, toward the river, toward home, toward whatever comes next. The hallway feels longer on the way out, darker too, now that you know what you're leaving behind. The walls press close and you can hear your own footsteps echoing, mixing with the footsteps of the few other people making this same journey from magic back to reality. Nobody is talking. Everyone is quiet, lost in their own thoughts, their own memories of the evening, their own reluctance to let it go. And then you emerge, back into the street, back into London proper. And the contrast is jarring in a completely different way than it was when you entered. When you arrived, you were walking from darkness into light, from ordinary into extraordinary. Now you're doing the reverse, and it hurts a little. The street is so dark compared to the gardens, so quiet compared to the orchestra and the crowds, so mundane compared to everything you just experienced. The magic is already fading, already becoming memory rather than present reality. The dock is still busy, though nothing like it was earlier. Maybe 24 people waiting for boats compared to the hundreds who arrived. And the watermen are still there, still calling out their prices, still ready to row you back across the Thames for a few pennies. You spot Tom, the waterman who brought you over hours ago. He's leaning against a post, looking tired but alert, and when he sees you, he straightens up. "Made it through the night, did you?" he asks, grinning. There is something knowing in that grin, something that suggests he has seen this before, has watched hundreds of people emerge from Vauxhall looking exactly like you probably look right now, dazed, exhausted, changed. "I did," you say. Your voice sounds strange to your own ears, rough. You have been breathing smoke and shouting over music, and maybe you screamed during the fireworks. Your throat is tired. "Worth it?" Tom asks as he helps you into his wherry. 3 other passengers are already settled. A well-dressed gentleman who is definitely drunk. A woman in her 30s who might be a servant like you, or might be something else. And a younger man who looks like he's barely staying awake. Worth it, you confirm. And even though you are exhausted, and you spent too much money, and you're going to regret this in the morning when you have to work, you mean it. It was worth it. Every penny, every moment, every complicated feeling you are carrying home with you. Tom pushes off from the dock and starts rowing. The rhythm is the same as it was coming over. Splash, pull, creak, splash, pull, creak. But everything else is different. The river is quieter now, fewer boats making the crossing. The city on the north bank is dark, most of its inhabitants asleep. Even the water seems calmer, less choppy, as if the Thames itself is winding down for the night. You look back at Vauxhall as the boat pulls away. You can still see a few lamps glowing through the trees, but they are being extinguished even as you watch. One by one the lights go out. The garden is closing. The performance is ending. By the time the sun comes up, it will be a completely different place. Empty, mundane, just 12 acres of landscaped ground waiting for evening to transform it again. "First time at Vauxhall?" the woman across from you asks. Her accent marks her as working class, probably a servant or shop worker. Someone like you. "Yes," you admit. "You?" She laughs. "Lord, no. I've been dozens of times. Save up all year for it, I do. Worth every penny to have a few hours where I am not scrubbing floors or emptying chamber pots. Tonight I danced with a gentleman, a real gentleman, mind you, and he had no idea I was a housemaid. Thought I was a lady. Me! A lady." She laughs again, delighted by the memory. "Course, that is the magic of Vauxhall, is it not? You can be anyone for a few hours. Did you see the balloon, you ask? The balloon! Her face lights up. Was that not something? I have seen them before, but it never gets old. Every time I think that man is going to die. He's going to fall right out of the sky and kill himself, and every time he does not. Magic, that is. Pure magic." The drunk gentleman makes a dismissive sound. "Not magic. Science. Hot air rises. Any schoolboy knows that." "Knowing how it works does not make it less magical," the woman retorts. "I know how bread rises too, but that does not stop me being amazed when it happens." You smile at this exchange. She is right, of course. Understanding the mechanism does not diminish the wonder. If anything, it increases it. The fact that humans figured out how to trap hot air in fabric and use it to fly, that is more miraculous than any magic spell could ever be. The young man who has been silent finally speaks, his eyes still closed. Did anyone else feel like they were being watched? The whole time, like Vauxhall was studying you, learning you, figuring out how to separate you from your money as efficiently as possible? Well, yes, the woman says. That is what it does. That is the whole point. But it does it so beautifully you do not mind. I minded, the young man says, every time I bought something, every time I paid for another drink or tried the food or tipped a server, I could feel the machine working, extracting, taking, and everyone just accepts it, smiles while being robbed. You are no fun at all, the woman tells him, but there is something thoughtful in her voice, like maybe he has a point she does not want to acknowledge. Tom rose in steady silence, not joining the conversation but clearly listening. You wonder what he thinks about all this. He makes his living from Vauxhall, ferrying people back and forth, depending on the gardens to attract customers who need his services. Does he resent the place, appreciate it? Both? The drunk gentleman has fallen asleep or passed out, his head lolling against the side of the boat. The woman is humming to herself now, some tune you recognises from earlier in the evening. One of the songs the orchestra played. She is trying to hold on to the night, to extend the magic for a few more minutes, and you understand that impulse completely, because you can feel it slipping away already. The extraordinary becoming ordinary, the special becoming memory. The wonder fading into something you will tell people about, but that they will never fully understand because they were not there, did not experience it, cannot know what it felt like to stand under 15,000 lamps and watch a man fly into the night ski. Have you ever tried to explain a transformative experience to someone who was not there? How the words always fail to capture it. How you end up saying you had to be there because nothing else conveys the reality of the moment. That is already happening. Vauxhall is becoming a story you will tell, and stories are never quite the same as the lived experience. The boat reaches the north bank, and Tom helps everyone out. The drunk gentleman needs significant assistance and nearly falls into the water twice. The woman tips Tom generously, more than she probably should, given that she is clearly not wealthy, and walks off humming. The young man hands over his coins with a scowl and disappears into the darkness without a word. You give Tom his fee plus a small tip, not as much as the woman gave, but more than strictly necessary. He's been kind to you, has ferried you to magic and back, has been part of your adventure even if he did not experience the adventure himself. Thank you, you tell them, and you mean it for more than just the boat ride. He nods, understanding. Come back sometime, Vauxhall is there all summer. Might save up for another visit. You want to say you will, but you know you probably will not. This was a once-in-a-lifetime experience, the kind you save for years to afford and then remember forever. You cannot make it ordinary by going back too often. It needs to stay special, needs to stay unique, needs to remain this perfect jewel of memory rather than becoming just another thing you do. But you do not tell Tom that. You just smile and say maybe, and then you turn toward home. London at this hour is a different city than the one you left. The streets are nearly empty. Most of the taverns are closed. The only people out are those with nowhere else to go, those whose work keeps them moving through the night, and those like you who are just now ending their evenings. You pass a night watchman making his rounds, calling out the hour in a voice that echoes off the buildings. 2 o'clock and all's well. Is it 2 o'clock already? The night has consumed more time than you realized. Your feet hurt, your head is starting to ache, probably from the smoke and the noise and the overstimulation. You are thirsty, you are tired. You're going to feel terrible in a few hours when you have to wake up and work. But you are also happy. Deeply, profoundly happy in a way you have not been in a long time. Because you did it. You saved for months and you went to Vauxhall Gardens and you experienced everything it had to offer. You walked paths that princes and prostitutes have walked. You heard music composed by the finest musicians of the age. You saw art that would normally be reserved for the wealthy. You watched fireworks and balloon ascents and performances of every kind. You navigated the dark walks and survived. You witnessed the machinery of spectacle and understood how it works and still found it beautiful. You carry all of that with you now. It is part of who you are, part of your story, part of the proof that your life is more than just work and sleep and survival. That you can have extraordinary experiences, that you can touch magic even if it costs half your weekly wages and leaves you exhausted. The streets grow more familiar as you get closer to home. You know these buildings, these corners, these landmarks. This is your neighborhood, your regular world, the place where you exist most of the time, and it looks smaller now, diminished. Not worse exactly, but less. Less exciting, less beautiful, less full of possibility. Is that good or bad? You're not sure. Maybe both. Maybe seeing what else exists, what else is possible, makes ordinary life harder to accept. But maybe it also gives you something to hold on to, a reminder that there is more out there than just these streets and this work and this endless cycle of labour and rest. You think about the people you saw at Vauxhall, the prince whispering to his mistress, the duchess walking arm in arm with her sister, the prostitutes working the crowd, the pickpockets looking for opportunities, the performers and the watermen and the servers and the workers cleaning up after everyone else. All of those lives, all of those stories, all intersecting for a few hours in a garden lit by lamps. And you think about the people who created Vauxhall, Jonathan Tyers with his ambition and his contradictions, William Hogarth with his art, Thomas Arne with his music, Captain Adams with his balloon, the hundreds of unnamed workers who built and maintained and operated the gardens summer after summer, the thousands of visitors who showed up night after night, paying their shillings, demanding spectacle, making the whole enterprise possible. All of those people, across decades, across generations, all contributing to something bigger than themselves, creating an institution, a cultural touchstone, a place that defined what public entertainment could be and influenced how people thought about art and music and social mixing and pleasure itself. And you were part of that. For one night, you were part of that story. A tiny part, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but real, present, there. You reach your lodgings, let yourself in quietly so as not to wake the other residents, climb the stairs to the small room you share with another girl who is already asleep. You undress in the dark, careful not to disturb her, and slip into bed. The sheets feel rough after the silk and satin you brushed against at Vauxhall. The room feels cramped after the open spaces of the gardens. Everything feels smaller, harder, less comfortable. But you are home, safe, and in a few hours you will wake up and go back to work and your life will continue in its usual patterns. Except something has changed. You have changed. You have proof now that extraordinary things are possible, that beauty exists, that wonder is real, and maybe that is enough. Maybe that single night at Vauxhall is enough to sustain you through months or years of ordinary days. Maybe the memory will stay bright and clear, a treasure you can turn to when everything else feels grey and difficult and overwhelming. Or maybe it will fade. Maybe in a few weeks or months, Vauxhall will seem like a dream you half remember, beautiful but unreal, impossible to hold on to. Maybe you will forget the details, how the lamps looked, how the music sounded, how your heart raced when the fireworks exploded overhead. But right now, in this moment, lying in the dark and remembering it is all still vivid, all still real, all still yours. The night at Vauxhall Gardens. The night you flew, even though your feet never left the ground. The night you experienced magic, even though you understood the machinery behind it. The night you were part of something bigger than yourself, something that will outlive you, something that mattered. And as you drift towards sleep, as exhaustion finally claims you and pulls you down into darkness, your last conscious thought is simple and true. It was worth it. Every penny, every moment, every complicated feeling, it was worth it. But your story with Vauxhall is not quite finished yet, because in your dreams tonight, and in the days and weeks that follow, you will process what you experienced. You will understand things you did not understand in the moment. You will see connections you missed, and you will start to ask yourself a question that has no easy answer. What does it mean that something so beautiful was also so exploitative, that something so democratic was also so commercial, that something that promised freedom delivered it wrapped in danger? And in trying to answer that question, you will come to understand something fundamental about pleasure gardens, about entertainment, about the complicated relationship between art and commerce and human desire. Sleep does not bring peace. It brings dreams, vivid and strange, where you are walking through Vauxhall again, but everything is different. The lamps are brighter than they should be, so bright they hurt to look at. The music is playing backward. The people around you have no faces, just smooth appances where their features should be. And you are searching for something desperately important, but you cannot remember what it is. You wake with a start, disoriented. Your heart racing. Sunlight is streaming through the window. Your roommate is already gone, already at work, and you are late, very late. You throw on your clothes, splash water on your face and run down the stairs knowing you are going to catch hell from the housekeeper for this. But as you rush through the streets toward the house where you work, yesterday's adventure comes rushing back. Not a dream. Real. You really went to Vauxhall. You really experienced all of that. And the proof is in your empty pockets, your aching feet, the faint smell of smoke that still clings to your dress. The housekeeper is furious as expected. You receive a lecture about responsibility and punctuality, and how girls these days have no sense of discipline. You accept it in séance, too tired to defend yourself, too preoccupied with your memories to care very much about her anger. She assigns you extra work as punishment. The silver needs polishing, the carpets need beating, the windows need washing. You nod and get to work, and as you polish the silver, as your arms move in the repetitive motions you have performed thousands of times before, your mind drifts back to Vauxhall. You think about the woman in the boat who said she goes every year, who saves up 12 months for a few hours of being someone else. Is that sustainable? Can you build a life around brief escapes from reality? Or does the contrast just make reality harder to bear? You think about the young man who saw the machinery of extraction, who felt himself being studied and exploited even while being entertained. Was he wrong? Or was he just more honest than the rest of you about what was happening? You think about the workers you saw cleaning up, the invisible labour that made your pleasure possible. You are one of them, you realise. Right now, as you polish someone else's silver in someone else's house, you are the invisible labour that makes their lives comfortable and pleasant. They have Vauxhall because you do not. They have leisure because you will work. The same equation, just different players. Does that make Vauxhall corrupt? Immoral? A symptom of everything wrong with the society built on inequality? Maybe, probably, but also maybe not entirely. Because here is the thing you keep coming back to. Vauxhall existed. For nearly 200 years it existed. And during that time, millions of people, not just the wealthy, not just the elite, but regular people, working people, servants, and shop clerks and apprentices and sailors and everyone else who could scrape together a shilling got to experience beauty and art and music and spectacle that would otherwise have been completely inaccessible to them. Yes, it was commercial. Yes, it exploited both its workers and its customers. Yes, it operated in morally grey areas and enabled behaviour that ranged from harmless flirtation to actual crime. All of that is true. But it also democratised culture in a way nothing else had before. It said you do not need to be born into the aristocracy to hear Handel or see fine art or witness the latest technological marvels. You just need 1 shilling. And while 1 shilling was not nothing, while it represented real sacrifice for people like you, it was still achievable, it was possible, and that possibility mattered, it still matters. Because Vauxhall proved that art and entertainment and beauty could be profitable, could be mass market, could be accessible without being dumbed down or made cheap. It proved that regular people wanted culture, would pay for culture, could appreciate culture just as much as their supposed betters. That legacy, that fundamental shift in how society thought about who deserved access to beauty, that is what Vauxhall contributed to the world. And it was not perfect, it was deeply flawed, but it was also revolutionary. Your hands are working automatically now, polishing silver until it gleams, while your mind processes these thoughts. The housekeeper walks by, checks your work, grunts in approval and moves on. You are invisible to her. Just another servant doing what servants do. But you do not feel invisible. You feel full of thoughts and memories and questions that would never occur to someone who had not spent a night at Vauxhall. Over the next few days, you notice yourself looking at London differently. The streets you walk every day suddenly seem full of stories. That woman hurrying past, where is she going? What is she thinking about? Does she have her own version of Vauxhall, her own escape, her own source of wonder? That man sitting on the corner, does he remember when pleasure gardens were everywhere? When London summers meant music and lights and outdoor entertainment? You start to see the city as a collection of performances, everyone playing roles, everyone performing versions of themselves. The lady in the carriage is performing wealth, the merchant in his shop is performing respectability, the preacher on the street corner is performing righteousness, and you, in your servant's clothes, are performing invisibility, acceptability, compliance. But you know now that these performances are not the whole truth, that beneath the roles people play are human beings with desires and fears and dreams, that the lady in the carriage might be miserable, that the merchant might be drowning in debt, that the preacher might doubt everything he proclaims, that you, the invisible servant, contain multitudes. Vauxhall taught you that. Not explicitly, not through any particular lesson or moment, but through the cumulative experience of seeing social boundaries blur, of watching people perform and then drop the performance, of understanding that identity is more fluid than the rigid class structure of 18th century England wants to admit. A week passes, then 2. The memory of Vauxhall is still vivid, but it is starting to settle into your past rather than dominating your present. You catch yourself sometimes forgetting the details. Was it 3 fireworks or 4 at the finale? How many paintings were in the supper box you looked at? The specifics are fading even as the emotional truth of the experience remains sharp. You wonder if this is how all transformative experiences work. The details blur, but the change they create in you persists. You are not the same person who crossed the Thames that night. You cannot be. You know too much now. You have seen too much. You understand too much about what is possible, what exists beyond your daily life, and that knowledge is both a gift and a burden. A gift because it gives you hope, shows you that beauty and wonder are real and accessible. A burden because it makes your ordinary life feel smaller, more constraining, harder to accept without question. Do you ever feel that way? Like knowing what else is out there makes it harder to be content with what you have? Like education or experience or awareness is both liberation and trap? That is where you are living now, in that complicated space between ignorance and enlightenment, between acceptance and ambition. One evening, as you are finishing your work, the housekeeper mentions that the family is planning to attend Vauxhall next week. They are making a party of it. The master and mistress, their adult children, some friends. They will take carriages across the new bridge, arrive fashionably late, stay for the fireworks, and return home satisfied with their evening of culture and entertainment. The housekeeper says all this casually, not thinking about how it might land with you. Why would she? You're just a servant. Your life and feelings are not factors she considers, but you hear it, and you feel a complicated mix of emotions. Part of you wants to tell them about your own night at Vauxhall, to say, I have been there. I know what you will see. I understand what you will experience. To claim your own knowledge, your own expertise, your own right to speak about something they think belongs only to people like them. But you do not. You just nod and say, yes, ma'am, and continue with your work, because telling them would not change anything, would not make them see you differently or value you more, would probably just make them uncomfortable, annoyed that a servant is presuming to have experiences, opinions, knowledge that should be reserved for her betters. So you keep your Vauxhall night to yourself, a private treasure, a secret knowledge, something that belongs to you alone. And in the weeks that follow, as summer deepens and the days get longer and hotter, you think about going back. You do the calculations in your head, how much you are saving per week, how long it would take to afford another visit, whether it would be worth it to go again or whether once was enough. But deep down you know you are not going back. Not this summer, maybe not ever, because some experiences are meant to be singular. Some magic only works once, and trying to recapture it, trying to recreate that perfect night would inevitably lead to disappointment. The lamps would seem less bright, the music less moving, the spectacle less spectacular, because you would know what to expect. You would have lost the crucial element of surprise, of discovery, of stepping into the unknown. So instead, you hold the memory. Polish it like you polish silver. Turn it over in your mind, examining it from different angles, finding new things to notice, new details to appreciate, and it sustains you. On the hard days when your work seems endless and meaningless, when your body aches and your hands are raw and you cannot remember why you keep going, you think about Vauxhall, about the lamps and the music and the balloon ascending into darkness, about the proof that beauty exists, that wonder is real, that your life contains more than just labour and exhaustion. And here is what you come to understand gradually over the weeks and months that follow. Vauxhall was not just a place, it was an idea. The idea that pleasure gardens embodied that ordinary people deserve extraordinary experiences, that beauty should be accessible, that one evening of wonder can sustain you through countless days of difficulty. That idea is more important than any individual garden. Vauxhall will close eventually, in 1859 to be exact, though you will be long dead by then. The gardens will be sold, demolished, turned into housing and factories and streets. The lamps will be extinguished forever. The orchestra will play its last note. The dark walks will be cleared and made safe and boring. All the physical reality of Vauxhall will disappear. But the idea will persist. It will evolve into music halls and amusement parks and movie theatres and concert venues and every other form of democratic entertainment that follows. It will spread across the world, influencing how people think about leisure and culture and who deserves access to beauty. And every time someone pays a modest fee to enter a space designed for wonder, every time beauty is made accessible rather than restricted to the elite, every time ordinary people get to experience something extraordinary, Vauxhall's legacy continues. Its influence persists. The revolution it started keeps unfolding. You are part of that revolution now. You, the housemaid who saved for 6 months and spent half her weekly wages on one perfect night. You prove that Vauxhall's model works, that people will sacrifice for beauty, that access matters, that the hunger for transcendence is universal, and carrying that knowledge, that experience, that proof of your own capacity for wonder and your own right to access culture and beauty. You continue through your days, working, saving, surviving, but also dreaming, remembering, knowing that you once walked paths lit by 15,000 lamps, once heard music composed by the finest musicians in England, once watched a man fly into the night sky. That happened, that was real, that was yours, and nobody, not the housekeeper, not the family you serve, not the rigid class structure of 18th century London, not even time itself, can take it away from you. The memory becomes part of who you are, part of your story, part of the proof that your life mattered, that you experienced things worth experiencing, that you were more than just the work you did and the role you played. And maybe, years from now, when you are old and tired and looking back on your life, Vauxhall will be one of the moments that stands out, one of the peaks in a landscape of otherwise ordinary days, one of the times when you truly lived, fully and completely, without reservation or regret. But that is still far in the future. Right now, in this moment, you are young, and the memory is fresh, and the world still seems full of possibility. Right now, Vauxhall is still open, still lighting its lamps every evening, still offering magic to anyone with a shilling and the courage to step into wonder. And as you think about all of this, as you process and understand and integrate your experience, one final question emerges. A question that has been building throughout this entire night we have spent together, throughout all these stories and observations and reflections. The question is simple but profound. What happens when Vauxhall closes? When the last lamp is extinguished and the last note is played and the gardens fall silent forever? What gets lost? What remains? And what does that ending tell us about the nature of beauty, the value of experience, and the complicated relationship between commerce and culture that Vauxhall embodied so perfectly? The end came slowly, then all at once. That is how endings usually work, is it not? A long decline that people get used to, that becomes the new normal, until suddenly there is a crisis and everything collapses, and what seemed permanent reveals itself to have been fragile all along. For Vauxhall Gardens, the decline started almost imperceptibly. In the early 1800s, the fashionable crowds began to drift away, not dramatically, not all at once, just gradually, season by season, year by year. The aristocracy found new entertainments, newer venues, places that did not carry Vauxhall's increasingly tarnished reputation. Because by this point, Vauxhall was known less for its art and music and more for its scandals, for the prostitution and the drunkenness and the general air of moral decay that clung to the place despite management's best efforts to maintain respectability. The gardens tried to adapt. They added more spectacle. The fireworks we talked about, the balloon ascents, tightrope walkers performing dangerous feats, elaborate reenactments of famous battles with hundreds of performers. In 1813 they held a fete to celebrate the Duke of Wellington's victory at the Battle of Vittoria. It was lavish, expensive, and hugely popular. In 1827 they staged a reenactment of the Battle of Waterloo with 1,000 soldiers. Can you imagine? 1,000 people on the grounds of Vauxhall performing a battle, with explosions and cavalry charges and dramatic deaths. And people came. People loved it. But they were not the same people who had come in Vauxhall's glory days. The mix had shifted. Fewer wealthy patrons, more working-class visitors, which is not inherently a problem. Remember, Vauxhall always prided itself on being accessible to everyone with a shilling. But it changed the economics. Working-class visitors spent less on food and drink. They could not afford the expensive extras that had made Vauxhall profitable. And London itself was changing. The city was expanding, swallowing up the rural spaces that had once made Vauxhall feel like an escape. By the 1840s, railway tracks ran close to the garden's borders. Gasometers were visible from the main walks. The sounds and smells of industry intruded on what was supposed to be a pastoral retreat. The magic was harder to maintain when you could see factory smokestacks from the orchestra pavilion. Competition intensified too. Vauxhall was no longer unique. Other pleasure gardens had learned from its success and were offering similar experiences, sometimes cheaper, sometimes with different attractions that drew crowds away. Music halls were becoming popular, offering entertainment in enclosed spaces where the weather did not matter and the program was more controlled. People had more options. Vauxhall was no longer the only choice for an evening out. The gardens changed ownership multiple times in the early 1800s. Each new owner tried to revive the fortunes, to recapture the glory of the Tyres era. None succeeded, because the problem was not management or marketing or programming. The problem was that the world had moved on. What Vauxhall represented, that particular combination of outdoor entertainment, cultural aspiration, and social mixing, was becoming obsolete. In 1840, the owners declared bankruptcy, just went broke, could not sustain the operation anymore. The debts were too high, the revenues too low, the whole enterprise too expensive to maintain. They tried to sell the gardens, but there were no buyers. Who would invest in a declining entertainment venue in an increasingly industrial neighbourhood? So they tried one more time, reopened in 1841 under new management with renewed promises of spectacle and wonder. And it worked for a while. People came, but the decline continued. Each season was a little weaker than the last. Each year the crowds were thinner, the revenues smaller, the future more uncertain. And then, in 1859, it ended. Permanently, the owners gave up. The gates closed. The lamps were extinguished for the last time. Vauxhall Gardens, which had operated for nearly 200 years, which had entertained millions of people, which had defined an entire era of London entertainment, simply ceased to exist. The land was sold, developers moved in. Within a few years, the trees were cut down, the pavilions demolished, the pathways paved over. Houses were built on the site, factories, streets. Nothing remained of the gardens except memories and some paintings and written descriptions and the stories people told about what it used to be like. In the 1860s, the area was badly bombed during... I am getting ahead of myself. The bombing was in World War II in the 1940s. By then, Vauxhall had been gone for 80 years. The houses that replaced the gardens were destroyed in the war and the area became slums. And then in the late 20th century, those slums were cleared, and finally part of the original site was turned into a public park. In 2012, that park was officially renamed Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens, a gesture toward history, a recognition of what had once existed there. If you visit today, you will find a small green space with some information boards explaining the history. There are two modern sculptures at the entrance. Tall concrete columns with figures on top, one a modern man offering a flower to an 18th century woman, past and present connected across centuries, but it is just a park. A nice park, but nothing magical. Nothing that would make you understand what Vauxhall once was, what it meant, why it mattered so much to so many people for so long. And that raises the question we started with. What gets lost when a place like Vauxhall closes? What disappears that cannot be recovered? The physical is obvious. The lamps, the paintings, the buildings, all gone, Some art pieces were salvaged and ended up in museums. A few architectural elements were preserved, but the vast majority was simply destroyed, lost to time and development and the inevitable decay of material things. But the real loss is not physical. It is experiential. It is the loss of a particular kind of space, a particular kind of possibility. Because what made Vauxhall special was not just what it contained, but what it allowed. The social mixing, the temporary dissolution of class boundaries, the freedom to perform different versions of yourself, the access to culture and beauty that would otherwise be restricted to the wealthy, all of that required a specific combination of elements that cannot easily be recreated. Modern theme parks try, concert venues try, concert. Any space designed for mass entertainment is in some way descended from Vauxhall, but they are not the same. They are more regulated, more controlled, safer, more expensive, more segregated by class, despite claims to the contrary. The particular wildness of Vauxhall, that sense that anything could happen and probably would, that mix of high art and low behaviour, that genuinely democratic access to spectacle, we do not have that anymore. Maybe we cannot have it anymore in a more regulated, more surveilled, more safety-conscious world. So what remains? What persists when the place itself is gone? Ideas remain. The concept that Vauxhall pioneered, that entertainment can be both profitable and culturally valuable, that ordinary people will pay for quality experiences, that access to beauty matters, those ideas changed the world. They influenced how we think about public space, about leisure, about who deserves to experience wonder. Stories remain. The thousands of personal stories like the one we've been following tonight. The housemaid who saved for 6 months. The couple dancing alone after everyone else left. The woman in the boat who went every year to feel like a lady. The young man who saw the machinery of extraction. The workers who made it all possible. All of those stories multiplied across millions of visitors over 2 centuries create a collective memory that persists even when the physical place is gone. And change remains. The people who visited Vauxhall were changed by it, sometimes in small ways, a memory they carried, a story they told, sometimes in larger ways, a shift in how they saw themselves, what they believed was possible, who they thought they could be, and those changes rippled outward, affected how they raised their children, what they valued, what they fought for, how they understood the world. You cannot measure that kind of impact. You cannot quantify it or preserve it in a museum, but it is real. It shaped history in ways that are invisible but profound. Think about the housemaid we followed tonight. She went back to her work, yes. She remained a servant in a rigid class system that did not value her as a full human being. But she knew something now. She had proof that beauty exists, that access is possible, that her capacity for wonder is just as real as anyone else's. And maybe that knowledge made her a little less willing to accept the limitations placed on her. Maybe she passed that knowledge to her children or her friends. Maybe she voted differently when working-class women finally got the vote. Maybe the experience of one night at Vauxhall contributed in some small way to the slow, grinding progress toward a more equitable society. Or maybe not. Maybe she just worked until she died and her story disappeared with her. But multiply that story by millions. Millions of people having experiences that showed them a different kind of world was possible. That adds up. That matters. That changes things, even if we cannot trace the specific lines of causation. This is what gets lost when we focus only on the physical closure of Vauxhall. We miss the less tangible but more important legacy. The ideas, the stories, the changes in consciousness that persisted long after the last lamp went dark. And here is something beautiful. That legacy continues. Every time you pay to enter a space designed for wonder, a museum, a concert, a theme park, anything, you are participating in the tradition Vauxhall helped create. Every time culture is made accessible rather than restricted to elites, Vauxhall's influence is there. Every time you have an experience that changes how you see yourself and the world, you are living out the possibility that places like Vauxhall proved was real. So Vauxhall is not really gone. It is transformed, diffused, woven into the fabric of how we think about entertainment and access and the role of beauty in human life. It exists in pieces, in descendants, in echoes, different but connected to the original vision that Jonathan Tyers and William Hogarth and Thomas Arne and thousands of unnamed workers created on 12 acres of land on the south bank of the Thames. And maybe that is a more fitting legacy than preservation would have been, because Vauxhall was never about permanence. It was always about the temporary, the ephemeral, the fleeting moment of beauty that could not be captured or held, but had to be experienced in the present. Every night at Vauxhall was unique, could never be exactly repeated, existed only in that moment, and then became memory. So it is appropriate somehow that the gardens themselves are gone, that you cannot visit them anymore, cannot walk the same paths, cannot see the same lamps or hear the same music, because that forces us to engage with Vauxhall the way it was always meant to be engaged with, as memory, as story, as proof that wonder exists even though we cannot hold on to it forever. Tonight, you and I have spent hours together, walking through Vauxhall Gardens. We crossed the river in darkness. We watched 15,000 lamps light up at once. We heard Handel's music and saw Hogarth's art. We navigated the dark walks. We watched fireworks explode overhead and a balloon ascend into the night sky. We ate overpriced ham and watched masked dancers and felt the thrill of danger and the weight of beauty. None of it was real. We are not in the 18th century. Vauxhall has been closed for over 160 years. The experience we shared tonight existed only in words, in imagination, in the space between storyteller and listener, but it was also real. Because the story is real, the history is real, the ideas and the impact and the legacy are real. And the part of you that responded to this story, that felt something when the lamps lit up or the fireworks exploded or the balloon flew, that wanted to know what happened next and how it felt and what it meant. That part of you is the same part that would have responded to the actual Vauxhall. The human hunger for beauty, for wonder, for experiences that transcend the ordinary, that has not changed. That connects you across centuries to every person who ever walked those paths. So thank you. Thank you for spending this long night with me, for following a housemaid through her once-in-a-lifetime experience, for thinking about what it all meant and what it all means. Thank you for caring about a place that no longer exists, for understanding that some things matter even though they do not last, for believing that beauty and wonder and access to culture are worth saving for, worth sacrificing for, worth remembering. The story of Vauxhall Gardens is over. The lamps are dark. The music has stopped. The gates are closed forever. But the story of why it mattered, of what it represented, of how it changed the world, that story continues. In every space designed for wonder, in every moment of transcendent beauty, in every person who believes they deserve access to culture and art and experiences that make them feel fully alive. And in that sense, Vauxhall will never really close, as long as we remember, as long as we tell the stories, as long as we understand that one perfect night at a pleasure garden can sustain someone through a lifetime of ordinary days. Sweet dreams, everyone. And may your own nights be filled with as much wonder as the lamps of Vauxhall once provided. Until we meet again for our next journey through strange history, rest well, and remember, beauty exists, wonder is real, and you deserve to experience both. Good night.